The first clear birth happened behind the abandoned 5-story insurance building at dawn, where raindrops slid down broken windows like nervous prayers, and the pigeons had long since filed noise complaints with God. No one knew what it meant at first, only that the air felt wrong. The sky had been a ripe, bruised purple all morning, thick with cloud-seeding plains that left thin white scars like chalk marks from a bored god. The streets of the town of Bayou Sainte-Mère moved slowly, as if the asphalt itself was tired of carrying secrets. Inside the convent, life still tried to feel normal. Sister Dorothea had been brushing Chaos's hair with military discipline and salon-level anxiety. He was taller now, thinner, eyes older than a 6th grader should carry. He watched the world like it owed him explanations. "Stand still," she said, spraying hairspray into his curls with a violence that suggested unresolved trauma. "You look like you fought a wiggle worm and lost." Chaos shrugged. "Hair doesn't matter, Mama D. People don't look at that when they're scared." Dorothea stopped brushing. That was the quandary, right there. Chaos had started finishing other people's thoughts, not reading minds, not magic, something colder, something knowing. Gumbo, in the kitchen, lifted a letter from the table with hands that still showed the strength of a much younger man. Bone wind chime catalogs surrounded him. Old Etsy printouts, newspaper clippings from his golden years selling wind chimes made of complicated materials in New Orleans. He read the letter twice, then laughed so loud the blades of the ceiling fan shook. Germaine came running in, half-dressed, holding a moldy piece of bread like he'd planned to throw it like a weapon. "What happened?" Gumbo held the letter up, eyes wet. "Germaine, baby. They want to do a documentary on my chimes." Silence. Then a sound like two souls snapping into sunlight. Germaine grabbed him, hugged him. "That's good news, Grandpa." That was the stroke of good luck. Bright and warm and rare. It arrived on a wrong day. Because outside the convent walls, the town was dissolving. In the elementary school yard, children were playing ring around the rosies when the first teacher collapsed, not in pain but in awe, as something clear, like glass jelly, pooled in her hands. Inside it, symbols, not letters, not drawings, moving, speaking, folding in on themselves, whispers like wind through old Victorian furniture. The grocery store reported Duck Duck Goose freezing mid-game in the daycare aisle, as children stared at small clear lumps appearing on the tile floor like raindrops that refused to evaporate. Someone found a discarded condom in an alley that had somehow turned into a tiny safe room sheltering a palm-sized cube of the clear substance. It wasn't blood. It wasn't flesh. It wasn't pain. It was birth without birth. Inside the convent's bonsai garden, Anae trotted lazily through dew-covered stones, spreading her soft luck like pollen. When she passed under one ancient oak, the bark peeled back slightly like skin. Under it, symbols. Professor Voss, down at the museum with Loon and Merrick, had been cataloging fine art reproductions of pterodactyl fossils when the museum lights flickered. The floor beneath the T-Rex replica glowed faintly. "Are we breathing this?" Merrick whispered. "I don't want this in my lungs," Loon whispered back. In the call center, phones rang non-stop. Every caller described the same thing. Clear goo, moving symbols, a sound inside their heads like Diana Ross humming through a busted radio. But the one who vanished was Kaito. She had left early that morning with a grocery list, and the ghost of her defunct Christian contemporary music career rattling around in her mind like old stage lights that never got turned off properly. She'd been walking past a cracked sidewalk when she saw kittens, real kittens, Then, something else. A ripple in the air. And then, nothing. By evening, panic had settled like damp laundry over the town. Dorothea stood in the chapel alone, fingers tight around broken rosary beads. Chaos stood in the doorway watching her. "You feel it, too," he said calmly. "I don't want to feel anything," she whispered. Gumbo sat outside carving a new wind chime, not from bone this time, but from driftwood and prayer, letting the midnight air run through him. Germain paced, fists clenched, whispering the parable of the wheat and the tares even though he barely remembered it properly. Something about weeds. Something about pretending peace. Something about waiting too long. At midnight, a scream echoed from the bonsai garden. Everyone ran. Anais stood frozen, mane lifted like static, and there, curled beside a ring of melted frost and damp stone, lay Kaito. Unresponsive. Eyes closed. Skin cold. Clear droplets of goo clinging to her fingers. Inside those droplets, symbols writhed. Chaos whispered behind them, voice calm and wrong and old. "It's starting," and the sky shed its first false snow. Dorothea had not slept. Sleep, when it finally came, had not been sleep. It had been turquoise. The sky in her dream had the exact shade of cheap vinyl diner booths and novelty hair dryers. A deep, choking turquoise that sat behind her eyes like a permanent bruise. She stood barefoot in a room made of stone-washed jeans, walls stitched together by seams and fraying threads marked with ancient recipes for nutmeg pie and diagrams that had no earthly use. And there, floating before her, wide and round as a broken moon, was Scott. He had no arms. He had no legs. He hovered like a hymn. His face was soft, kind, a little lost. "Listen," he had said, without moving his mouth. "This goo is older than dirt." She'd tried to ask questions, but her tongue had turned to chalk. "It's what happens when places remember things they weren't supposed to keep," he went on. "You don't want to call it satanic. That's lazy. You don't want to call it necromancy. That's half true. It's more like memory trying to be born again." Behind him, cards of canasta floated through the air, turning into birds, then into crosses, then into something that looked like Nancy Grace whispering into a microphone made of candles. "People been messing with things for a long time," Scott had said. "Food stamps fed bodies. This kind of magic fed ghosts." In the far corner of the dream, a pair of ruby slippers sat untouched, glowing. "When it comes," he'd whispered, "somebody always pays. And it's never the person who deserves it." Dorothea woke up choking on air and the scent of old nutmeg, and she knew what the goo was. She just didn't want to say it. By morning, the town was losing its grip. Turquoise-colored birds perched on telephone wires. Mold bloomed in symmetrical, beautiful patterns across fences. The news vans had arrived, and Nancy Grace was, somewhere, still yelling about something unrelated. Gumbo sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper upside down, blissfully unaware that his hands were trembling. Germain made eggs that tasted like regret. Chaos watched the walls like they might blink. And Kaito had not moved. They found her still breathing at dawn, faintly. The symbols in the clear gel around her hands crawled slowly now, like tired thoughts. Clotilde sat with her head in her lap, whispering old songs she wasn't sure she remembered correctly. Sean stood in the doorway, lost, broken, trying not to look like a man who had lost something that had not technically belonged to him yet. They tried everything. Holy water, cold cloths, a rosary whose beads had been broken and rethreaded too many times, a book of prayers stained with gumbo and grace. At noon, Germain knocked a bowl of soup over. Split pea, everywhere. Gumbo slipped in it, flailing wildly like an elderly prophet on a banana peel. He went down, in spectacular, slow-motion fashion, pulled a curtain with him, and brought the Christmas decoration skeleton down on top of himself. Ralph the parrot screamed, "Best day of my life!" The room went silent. Then laughter burst out. Ugly, startled, wet laughter. Even Dorothea hissed through tears. Even Kaito smiled faintly. The humor was wrong, and it was necessary. The tragedy arrived quietly. No scream, no thunder, just a faint exhale. Kaito's breathing stopped sometime between the laughter and the clatter of Gumbo, trying to get untangled from tinsel. It was Germain who noticed. "Grandma?" he whispered. The room froze. Dorothea crossed the floor in 3 steps. She took Kaito's face gently in her hands. She looked, she felt, she understood. The room collapsed inward. Sean made a sound no one recognized as human. Clotilde pressed her forehead to the floor. Annie lowered her head so low her mane brushed the stone. And Chaos didn't cry. He just said quietly, "It wasn't her time. Somebody pushed the current. They buried her that evening. Not with dirt, not with earth, but with light. They laid her before the mirror. The goo dried and cracked like glass around her fingers. The symbols stilled. Dorothea knew who had caused it. It had not been on purpose. It had been fear. It had been panic. It had been Professor Voss who, terrified by the glowing bones, the twisting relics, and the living symbols, had mixed chemicals from the museum's preservation lab into the holy water supply, trying to neutralize the anomaly. He'd thought he was saving everyone. He'd poisoned the air. He didn't know, but he would live knowing. That night, the mirror shimmered, and Scott appeared again, blurred, less clear. "You were warned," he said softly. Dorothea didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked up and said, "They never are." The last thing the mirror showed her was a fractured reflection of chaos, smiling faintly at a crack in the wall that hadn't been there before, and behind that crack, another color, not turquoise, something older, deeper, waiting. Chapter 3. Hymns for a Body That Never Walked. They hadn't meant to sing. It just happened. The bones in the bonsai garden began to hum at dusk, not loudly. Not angrily, just a soft vibration through the soil, like the garden itself had grown a voice and wasn't sure what language to use yet. Gumbo felt it first. He stood barefoot on the back porch and felt the boards tremble under his soles. "Feels like a choir warming up," he muttered. Clotilde stepped beside him, or like the earth forgot how to stay still. Dorothea said nothing. She already knew. When the first note slipped into the air, it wasn't frightening. It wasn't holy. It was familiar, like the last song played at a diner right before closing time, when the coffee tastes like regret and hope mixed together. And suddenly, memory. Scott. They remembered him not as a miracle or a threat, but as sound. A floating body of warmth with no arms, no legs, and no shame. A being who sang because he could not walk and loved because he could not understand why anyone wouldn't. Years ago, when he had come through the mirror and hovered awkwardly in the chapel, they had been afraid, then curious, then respectful, and briefly, foolish. They had worshipped him, not because he demanded it, but because his humming made their tired hearts feel younger. His laugh felt like a bell rung underwater. He had an IQ of about 30, Gumbo murmured now, smiling sadly. But he understood happiness better than any of us. Clotilde laughed softly. He called me Sister, loud heart. Dorothea closed her eyes. He called me Storm Mother. The bones began to sing properly. Then, not screaming, not rattling, but singing, a chord built of old memories and buried prayers. Chaos stepped into the garden barefoot. He wasn't afraid of the sound. He never was. "Is it him?" he asked. Dorothea nodded. "Not him. The echo of what he left in us." It had not spoken in weeks. That evening, it whispered, "He wakes under different names. Now." Loon and Merrick both heard it. They did not tell Professor Voss. The mirror flickered alive without being summoned. Concepcion's image didn't appear. Scott's didn't either. Instead, words burned across the glass like frost on flame. Do not fear the song. Fear the silence that follows it. Back at the convent, the bones' melody shifted. Warmer. Almost joyful. Chaos raised his hands without realizing it. The air shimmered faintly. And then came the alert. Quiet at first, buried in the harmony. A feeling, not a sound. Something was coming. Not tonight, not tomorrow. But soon. Gumbo felt it in his chest. Clotilde felt it in her teeth. Dorothea felt it in the old scar between her ribs that had never come from anything. Visible. Danger was approaching. But not as an enemy. As a threshold. The bones sang louder, and for the first time the sound felt like a promise instead of a warning. The wind moved through the bonsai garden, bending branches that had not bent in years. The mirror went dark, again. The antelope lowered its head. And Chaos, small, calm, luminous, smiled faintly and said, "I think we're about to be asked to choose." The sky cleared. Stars burned brighter. And somewhere between dimensions, Scott sang once, and went quiet. Chapter 4. The Garden That Forgot Its Size. The first bonsai tree stretched at exactly 3:17 a.m. No one saw it happen, but everyone felt it. The air shifted, like when a room suddenly decides it's not big enough for its own breath. The tiny oak that had lived peacefully in its ceramic dish began to twist upward, not violently, but with purpose. Its bark thickened, its branches bent into looping, cathedral shapes, and its miniature leaves expanded into full, breathing things. By dawn it stood 5 feet tall. By noon, it had company. Another tree split through the gravel walkway, then another, then another. Within hours, the bonsai garden had transformed into a maze. Trees that were still shaped like bonsai, still delicate and detailed and careful, but now towering, bending, weaving together into a world of living hallways. Clotilde stood barefoot at the edge of it, whispering, "This feels intentional." Dorothea, who had grown wiser but not quieter with age, nodded. "This feels like being watched by furniture." Chaos stepped into the maze. The branches leaned aside for him. A neigh followed. The trees did not touch them. They parted. They recognized him. The town began to change alongside it. The clear goo phenomenon accelerated. Men at bus stops. Women in grocery stores. A woman in blue lycra biking shorts from 1987 who insisted she biked better when she felt the spirit of Michael Landon guiding her knees. More and more people produced transparent, glassy masses in their hands, in their laps, in their lives. The goo no longer just formed, it communicated. Words floated inside like goldfish. "Wait, we see you." "Not yet." The goo developed awareness. It shifted. It reacted to proximity. When Chaos walked near it, it rippled, as though greeting a missing parent. And then the wings began. It happened slowly, painfully, beautifully, small, soft, jointed and skin-stitched. Not for flight, only for meaning. Sister Eugenia awoke, screaming, when the first pair pushed through her shoulder blades like wet lace made of bone and grace. Clotilde cried. Dorothea crossed herself. Chaos just nodded like he'd expected the day to go exactly that way. The chicken feet. At dusk, a porcelain plate appeared on the convent steps. No one saw who brought it. 15 polished chicken feet rested neatly atop it, arranged in a spiral. They were clean, dry, symbolic. Gumbo lifted the plate slowly. "They're inviting us," he said. Germain frowned. "To what?" Gumbo looked toward the bonsai forest. "To something we ain't built yet. Loose ends, neatly tied." The chaos from earlier chapters softened. The mirror stabilized. Scott's voice no longer glitched the glass. The antelope at the museum stopped warning and began waiting. The wind chimes Gumbo had once made from bones now sang warmly instead of warningly. The danger they once hinted at had passed. Even Professor Voss shared less terror in his eyes and more awe. And the bones stopped migrating. They stayed quiet, as if they'd delivered their message. The trucker. Near the town's edge, a battered semi rumbled to a stop. Out stepped a runaway trucker. Beard rough, eyes kind, jacket made of something that looked like sheep's wool but might have just been stubborn hope. He smelled like oil, old coffee, and honesty. He tipped his cap. He looked at the growing trees. "Y'all got something holy and wrong growing here." Clotilde smiled. "We prefer holy and misunderstood." The haircut. Germain came barreling out of the convent in tears. "They gave me an 80s haircut, on purpose." Gumbo hugged him. "It's a rite of passage." And then the grave. Just before midnight, Dorothea walked alone to the old cemetery. She didn't know why, she just knew. The wind was cold. Impossible. Southern air doesn't behave that way. She reached Kaito's grave. The earth was smooth, wrong, undisturbed, untouched. The headstone tilted slightly, and the soil had never been turned. Dorothea dropped to her knees. The body was gone, not dug up, not stolen, not disturbed, simply missing. As if it had never been there, as if death itself had reconsidered. Behind her, the bonsai forest shifted. Branches clicked together. And for one brief heartbeat, the clear goo on the headstone's surface formed a final message. She walked backward through time. Dorothea whispered, "Oh God," and the stones answered with silence. Chapter 5, The Day the Dead Knocked Politely. Kaito appeared at exactly 6:44 a.m. Not from the road, not from the sky, not from the earth. She simply stood there in the middle of the convent courtyard as if she'd always been standing there and everyone else had just been late to noticing. Her feet were bare. Her dress was white, but not funeral white, more like laundry day white, sun-dried, honest. Her eyes shone with that quiet look people got when they had seen the back of something larger than themselves and come back with manners. Ane stopped mid-step. Chaos froze completely. Dorothea dropped the basket of damp sheets she was carrying, and Gumbo said softly, "Well now." She did not speak at first. She lifted her head slowly, and the wind moved around her like it had been waiting for permission. Something about her wasn't right. Not wrong, not evil, just other. The convent air breathed like lungs turning inside out. People stepped back. Others stepped closer. Clotilde whispered, "You look like you done met God," and came back with a lunch order. Kaito smiled faintly. "I can't stay," she said. "But I had to touch the ground first, so it would remember I was not done." The sky dimmed. Not darkened. Dimmed. Like someone lowering a lantern, not blowing it out. The magic mirror, hidden behind 3 locked doors and 1 false wall, shattered into light. A voice, old, hushed, shaking with authority, spoke through its silver veins. She cannot remain. She will not fall. Do not follow. The warning images flashed, a field of bones singing, a goose with eyes like lanterns, a town swallowing itself, chaos standing on water that wasn't water. Gumbo felt the words before he heard them. Dorothea felt them in the scar tissue under her ribs. Clotilde crossed herself twice and whispered, "This is above our clergy pay grade." The goose. No one knew where it came from. It walked out of the Rio Grande like it had been forged from river mud and forgotten prayers. Large, white, too still. It waddled into town, and people began to change, not violently, not loudly, just subtly. A man stared at the sky and forgot he owned a bakery. A woman organized her canned goods from largest regret to smallest. 2 people tried to mail envelopes filled only with normal air. Germain stood at the base of the wraparound porch, sweat streaking his face, eyes hollowed. The documentary crew had just arrived. Big camera, nervous smiles, clipboards. They were there to film Gumbo's wind chimes, the bone chimes that once sang the truth to the wind. Germain was supposed to help. Instead, he turned slowly toward the crew and said, "I ain't been sleeping." Silence fell like dropped silverware. His hands shook. "I ain't been eating right. Ain't been thinking right." The goose stood at the end of the driveway, watching. His voice cracked. "I've been losing myself." No one laughed. Because this wasn't funny. Not glitter funny, not grim funny, just sad. Gumbo stepped forward and held his face gently. "That goose ain't done this to you, boy," he said softly. "You're hurt. We'll get you help," Germain cried. And the camera kept rolling. Because that is what cameras do, and because truth, even when ugly, felt cleaner than pretending. Later, P-tests were mentioned, quietly, kindly, firmly. Ane. Ane stepped forward and pressed her horn to the dirt. Light poured outward. Flowers bloomed in tight spirals. Pumpkins, out of season, out of reason, rose from the earth like confused blessings. They were warm, faintly glowing. The goose backed away. The wind shifted. The town breathed easier. The trucker. The old trucker had parked his busted Caprice Classic again. This time, the hood was open. He crawled out from under it with grease in his beard and honesty in his eyes. "I don't trust that bird," he said. Nobody argued. But then, he smiled. He held up something he'd found stuck in the undercarriage, a tiny metal object, a pistolite. Not a weapon, just a charm, a symbol. "That ain't from here," he whispered. And for the first time, people wondered if he was not what he seemed. Clotilde stories. That night, as the sky went mauve and the pumpkins steamed, Clotilde sat cross-legged on the chapel steps and reminisced aloud about dynasty. Remember when Alexis pushed Crystal into the pool? Sip of tea. Remember the shoulder pads? Second sip. The betrayal in the ballroom? Gumbo nodded politely. He did not know what she was talking about. Chaos listened closely. Ralph the parrot did not come home that night. His perch was empty. His scarf lay folded, and somewhere the goose honked once, and then Brigsby. At exactly midnight, every lantern at the museum went dark. Inside the oldest exhibit hall, the temperature dropped. A faint glow pulsed against the walls. A man's silhouette moved through the glass, not walking, gliding. The camera from Gumbo's documentary flickered back on by itself, and for one final, terrifying moment, the lens turned to face Professor Brigsby, smiling, watching, holding something that looked like a key carved from bone. The chapter ended there, on feathers, on silence, on the sound of a lock turning somewhere no one could see. Chapter 6, A Forest of Messages. The rose bushes bloomed out of season. That was how they knew things had gone too far. Along the iron fence that hugged the convent's boundary, thorned stems twisted and leaned, their petals opening in deep, wounded reds and pale, bone-soft whites. The roses had grown from soil that had once held more secrets than seeds, and nobody said it aloud. But everybody thought the same thing. Dead grandparents would not have liked this. The air carried pine where pine did not belong. Christmas clean and sharp, drifting down from nowhere. It smelled like old family reunions that pretended everything had healed when it hadn't. The sky hung low, as if listening. Inside the call center, tragedy bloomed quieter. Not loud, not cinematic. A soft collapse, a headset sliding off, a chair gently tipping. One of the workers, a woman who always wore turquoise earrings and believed in cloud seating, slumped forward mid-call. She didn't die, but she didn't wake up quickly either. The phones kept ringing. They always did. Father Lionel arrived before lunch, pulling his collar tighter, walking with that particular disappointed grace that only priests who run convent-adjacent disaster zones can manage. He summoned Dorothea, Clotilde, and Gumbo to the small office beside the kitchen, where the wallpaper had once been optimistic. This place, he said carefully, has begun to look less like a sanctuary, and more like a weather event. Clotilde folded her arms. The wings are not my fault. Father Lionel looked tired. The tails? Dorothea shrugged. Growth is uncomfortable. He rubbed his face. I will not shut this down, he said. But there will be consequences if things continue to sprout. Some of those consequences did fall on Gumbo. Not cruelly, not loudly, but visibly. The diocese put conditions on his documentary. The crew had to film only approved areas. The bone wind chimes had to stay off camera. Gumbo didn't complain. He just felt smaller in rooms he used to feel tall in. The goo learns to feel. Out in the streets, the clear goo thickened. It no longer sat silently. It trembled. It pulsed. It curved toward people like a curious animal. Messages swirled inside it. Come close. We remember. We are not hungry. People still gave birth to it, without pain, without spectacle, without logic. It simply appeared in their hands, laps, grocery carts, shoeboxes, and once inside a casserole dish beside a forgotten meatloaf. And the wings, they kept growing. Small, useless wings, soft, skin-stretched wings. They fluttered when people felt near the truth. Tails twitched when people lied. Nobody liked realizing that. The bones. They found more of them under the bonsai maze. Thousands. Lined like ribs beneath the earth. Old. Older than maps. Older than arguments. Gumbo saw them first. He didn't tell Germaine. He didn't tell the microphones under the oak tree. Documentary crew setting up. He pressed his hand to the dirt and whispered. They were never meant to be sold. The ground felt alive, not cruel, not angry, just waiting. Ralph. Ralph the parrot was found behind the museum, hanging upside down, wrapped in ceremonial cords made from fax machine wiring and something that looked suspiciously like airmail string. He was perfectly unharmed, unbothered, furious. I can't get out, and I have thoughts about it, he yelled. No one untied him immediately. He needed the moment. Kyoto. Nobody knew when Kyoto started recruiting. Not officially. Not loudly. He spoke softly to people carrying goo. He nodded solemnly at those with wings. He smiled gently at those with tails. He never said he was a leader. He just behaved like one. Soon, small groups gathered around him, touching the clear, living, gelatinous shapes with reverence. The goo responded. Symbols grew more complex. Listen. Wait. The garden remembers. Old things rising. Pine trees leaned over the road like witnesses. A passing horse and buggy, real, slow, cracked leather, rolled past the convent gates without explanation. Someone mailed an airmail envelope to the convent. Inside it, dirt, feathers, and a printed page from dial-up internet days. The words, "You have been here before." Gumbo felt it in his hands. Clotilde felt it in her feet. Dorothea felt it in the place between her lungs where uncried prayers rested. The interview. The documentary crew was ready. Lights set up, microphones clipped, a low hum of electricity. Gumbo and Dorothea sat side by side. Behind them the bonsai forest shifted, invisible to the camera. Not invisible to fate, the reporter asked, gently. When did you realize this place was different? Gumbo smiled. Dorothea looked at the roses. And somewhere behind them, the earth moved. The chapter ended with a quiet realization. The goo wasn't invading. The wings weren't mutations. The tails weren't accidents. The bones weren't secrets anymore. They were invitations. And whatever was coming next was already inside the soil. Chapter 7. The warning came from the wrong angle. Chaos's hallucination did not fade. It settled, like dust on books that never meant to be opened. He walked through the oversized bonsai corridors alone, the leaves whispering like cheap gossip and holy scripture mashed together. The branches curved so precisely around him you'd think they'd been trimmed by a god with nervous habits. And then he smelled it. Cold air, old paper, museum dust. Brigsby, he whispered. The name felt like biting down on a penny. The walls shifted. The glass hallway returned. That false place made of reflected thoughts and unfinished warnings. At the far end stood a shadow, shaped like a man, who had never forgiven the world for firing him. Brigsby's voice wasn't loud. It was polite. You all grow very loudly, the shadow said. Chaos shook his head. Stay out of my yard, he replied. The shadow leaned forward. I'm already in your bones. Chaos snapped awake in the real world, with dirt under his fingernails and blood nowhere in sight. He ran to Dorothea. He's coming. She didn't ask who. She knew. Kaito began to glow, not bright, not holy, just undeniable. People came to her late at night, wearing house slippers and broken hope. She never raised her voice. She never asked for money. She said things like, you don't need to be more. You need to be kinder. Or, stop pretending God can't hear your ugly thoughts. Her gospel wasn't blasphemous. It was baffling. It involved sitting down more often, washing your hands before lying, apologizing to mirrors. People listened. People cried. One man brought her a goat he did not understand. She sent it politely away. The town grew things, woke up with a third arm like faintly from their back. Someone tentacle sprouting porch. Not where skin should do that, more like shadow growing extra opinions. Wings remained small, tails flicked with more intention, and tentacles were shy. They slid under jackets, curled behind belts, peeked from coat collars like badly behaved thoughts. The town did not riot. The town adjusted. You got a tail? Yes? Okay. That was most conversations. The convent incident. It began with silence. All the nuns froze, not praying, not moving, just still. The air thickened. The chapel lights flickered, and the goo appeared. Not from them, not by them, not because of them. It manifested, smooth, clear, cooling itself into being like fog that fell asleep and stayed solid. Inside the transparent mass colored smoke, blue, purple, sick green, patient gold, and symbols. We arrive. We are older than fear. Do not cut us. The nuns said nothing. They arranged them gently in bowls, like sacred gelatin that nobody had the recipe for. Voss, Merrick, and Loon. Professor Voss wiped his glasses. "You seeing this?" he asked. Merrick nodded. Loon was already sketching. They used microscopes, ultraviolet lamps, one antique accordion bellows. They discovered the goo wasn't a substance. It was a memory container. A soft library for things the world wasn't allowed to forget. 3 more Lizzie Borden facts. A volunteer helping catalog artifacts leaned toward Chaos one afternoon and whispered, 1. The murder weapon was never found. 2. The house was later turned into a bed and breakfast. 3. People claim it's still haunted to this day. Chaos nodded politely. This information did not help, but it felt right. The trucker. The runaway trucker, now wearing a cheap convent-issued apron, was folding towels when Clotilde found him. "You ever think you'd be working for nuns?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I always thought angels would be meaner." They shared coffee. The moment was small, and it mattered. England, tree trunks, and the Mexican mafia. The goo from one bowl reshaped into an image of England. Foggy bridges, stone churches. Another showed tree trunks splitting open and revealing writing. Someone overheard the phrase Mexican mafia on a documentary tape, and no one knew why the goo repeated it symbolically, like a child learning a bad word. Brigsby's shadow. At the museum, the lights went low. Brigsby's outline passed behind old glass cases. He touched nothing, but everything felt touched. Back at the convent, a final goo message appeared in darkness. He walks without feet. He smells what you hide. Lock your soft places. Chaos stood in the hallway late that night holding the bowl. The smoke turned black. The symbols twisted. And the final message pulsed like a heartbeat. Tomorrow, he comes closer. And the accordion, somewhere in storage, slowly exhaled a breath no one had put inside it. Chapter 8. Smoke that learned to walk. The clear goo did not explode. It exhaled. That was the problem. The colored smoke inside the translucent masses began to drift outward, slow and curious, sliding through cracked windows, under doors, into grocery bags and prayer books. The smoke did not burn. It did not choke. It made people feel too much. A man eating Fruity Pebbles started crying because he suddenly remembered every bike he ever loved. A woman listening to Danzig in a parked car turned the volume down and whispered, "I forgive them," without knowing who them was. The smoke rolled through abandoned houses and wrapped itself around shoelaces hung over street cables like forgotten wishes. Old guilt softened. New questions arrived. Kaito stood barefoot in the middle of the road and whispered, "It ain't poison. It's truth." Ralph. Resolved. Ralph was found. Again. This time from an old television antenna behind the parish hall. Dangling. Wrapped in prayer beads. Angrier than furniture. "This is becoming a personality trait for me," he squawked. Chaos cut him down. Ralph flapped once, sat very still, and said, "I have seen a thing that should not blink." But he was alive. He was safe. That thread tied Kaito's sermon, the fall, and the fracture. Kaito climbed the old landfill hill, the town's version of a mountain. People followed her, those with tails, those with wings, those with tentacles wrapped politely under sweaters. She didn't shout. She sat. She said, "Blessed are those who think they're broken. They are already open." A man in denim culottes cried. Someone passed loose meat sandwiches around. Someone muttered something about pepperoni nipples and got smacked gently with a cranberry scone. She spoke in sideways riddles. Do not chase healing. Let healing trip over you. And then she fell, not theatrically, not prophetically. She slipped on an old Price is Right tote bag. Bone cracked. Twice. A wrist. A leg. Fractured in 2 places. She laughed, even while wincing. Well, I did say humility was mandatory. Sean arrived before the ambulance. He ran. He knelt. He held her. Don't be stupid, he whispered. You still got work. She squeezed his hand. You still got me. The unexplainable collapse. In the ambulance, Sean went quiet, then pale, then gone. Not dead, not dying, just unreachable. By the time they reached the hospital, they were wheeled into the same room. Beds side by side, machines breathing for them. Curtains half drawn like the world couldn't bear to look directly. Gumbo, Dorothea, and Clotilde. The mirror speaks. Behind the locked door, behind the false wall, the mirror burned. Not with fire, with warning. Words appeared like frost on hot metal. The smoke is not finished. The goose has learned to breathe. What was once water is now thinking. Dorothea whispered, This ain't about miracles. This is about losing control. Gumbo squeezed her shoulder. We've been losing control since the minute we met. Clotilde crossed herself once. Then, once more for good measure, the nuns and the goo explained, without cruelty. It did not happen as injury. It did not happen as horror. The goo manifested through them like condensation passing through glass. A spiritual pressure, a release. Each nun found herself holding a bowl-shaped miracle that had simply arrived, as if the body had exhaled a soul into shape. Clear, polished, alive. Smoke inside them churned deeper now. The messages shifted. We are becoming heavier. We will not be hidden. Are you ready? The convent creaked. The bells rang without fingers. The goose and the leakage. The goose, no longer bound by river or logic, moved through the smoke. It was not a bird now. It was an idea in a bird shape. It breathed once, and the smoke bent. People in town started behaving strangely, not violently, not wickedly, but like puppets who realized they had strings and wanted to argue about it. A man tried to mail the Eiffel Tower. A woman insisted Bobby Brown had visited her through a wigwam. Someone absolutely swore the Loch Ness Monster was in the drainage ditch. Shoelaces on power lines tightened themselves. Old locks turned. Windows opened slightly wider than they should. Visiting someone in jail. Clotilde visited someone behind glass. The paperwork, the metal detectors, the humiliating weight. She thought about religious homes that weren't safe, rules that hid harm under holiness, and she whispered, We're going to be better than old systems. The final message. The smoke thickened. The goo pulsed faster. The mule-brained part of the world trembled. A Bible lay open in the convent chapel, turned by no hand. The page landed on this, and Dorothea read it aloud. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. Ephesians 6:12. The goose breathed again, and the message formed its final shape inside the largest vessel of living glass. They are going to breathe you back. Do not let them. Or do. Choose. The chapter ended on a town under a blanket of colored smoke, nuns holding living glass in human hands, Kaido and Sean unconscious and breathing together in a hospital room, and the goose lifting its head toward the convent. As if preparing to speak. Chapter 9. The stone that learned a name. The goose lifted its head, and the world did not end. That was the first surprise. Resolve came quietly that morning. 2 loose threads shrank back into place like stitches pulled tight. First, the smoke from the goo stopped drifting into homes. It settled. It learned to behave. It hovered instead, like fog that had learned manners. No more havoc in kitchens. No more scandal in laundry rooms. People slept. Second, the mysterious shoelaces hung from street cables. Those tokens of unfinished remembering slipped off overnight and vanished. Nobody took credit. Nobody asked. The town decided to live. For now, Scott in the mirror. The mirror breathed in the secret room. Scott appeared, soft-edged, floating, wide-eyed. He didn't speak aloud, he thought. And the thought formed in the glass. The goo is not your enemy. It is your shadow when your body forgets how to speak. It holds what you left behind, Dorothea whispered. We've been leaving a lot behind. Scott blinked slowly. You have been walking without asking the ground for permission. Gumbo nodded. He understood that too well. Louisiana City, Baton Rouge. Kaito chose Baton Rouge. She said it felt symbolically congested. She stood barefoot on the cracked pavement outside an old shopping center. Anae stood patiently beside her, radiant and small and glowing in the way things glow when they don't belong to usual rules. Kaito climbed awkwardly onto her back. It was not graceful. It was not majestic. It was faithful. Her followers gathered, not dead, not violent, not rotting, just vacant in the eyes, soft in the way they walked. Like people who had sat too long in waiting rooms of their own lives. They called themselves her disciples because it felt easier than saying, I don't know who I am anymore. But she talks like she does. Kaito raised one hand. Not in battle, she said. Not in noise, but in noticing. Anae stepped forward, and the air bent slightly around them both, like prophecy, wearing house slippers. Dorothea and Gumbo, concerned. Back at the convent, Dorothea folded laundry like it was an exorcism. She's going to hurt herself, she said. Gumbo quietly fixed a broken chair. She done walked through worse than stone, he said. But I don't like the eyes on them people. Clotilde sipped weak coffee. I don't like people who blink in unison. The argument. It began over the radio. Someone said Marley Matlin's name. Someone else mentioned Helen Keller. Someone, a young volunteer with spiky hair, said, You don't really believe all that was real, do you? The air froze. Dorothea turned slowly. Some stories ain't yours to question like that. The conversation turned sour, then loud, then physical, not cruel, not hateful, just human. 2 women wrestled briefly over the meaning of history, disability, and dignity. They were pulled apart. Both cried afterward. Both apologized. But the fracture remained. Not all mysteries should be touched with dirty hands. Devastation. The devastating thing came quietly. A quiet farmhouse on the outskirts burned to the ground. No one died. But everything inside the house, every photo, every heirloom, every proof we were here, turned to ash. The clear goo left at the scene pulsed. "We remember for you." The family wept. But they weren't alone. Pleasant thing. Later that day, south of town, pine trees stood in perfect, soft alignment. Someone brought Watergate salad to a picnic. A woman who hadn't smiled in years laughed when cranberries fell into the wrong bowl. A man who once feared aliens stood outside at night and thought, "If they come, I hope they're polite." And for a moment, the world felt clean. The stone. Late that night, Gumbo felt it. The tightening, the deep pressure. He moved slowly to the small bathroom beside the kitchen, gripped the sink, breathed. Time stretched. Then it passed. He stared at it in the moonlight. Small, pale, impossible. And then it blinked. It shifted. A tiny, perfect mouth formed on its smooth side and whispered, "You took too long." Gumbo dropped it. It did not shatter. It looked up at him, and he felt fear that had nothing to do with pain. The Bible opened itself again. The chapel door, unlocked by no one, swung slowly inward. A single Bible page turned. Dorothea read aloud into the dark, "And the stones shall cry out." Luke 19:40. The stone in the sink blinked again and smiled. The chapter ended with Kaito riding Ane through a cracked Baton Rouge street, her soft-eyed disciples trailing silently behind, the goo pulsing with memory, and a tiny stone learning words. Chapter 10. Stations made of memory. Kaito did not call it a crucifixion. She called it completion. That mattered. She had not been trying to offend God. She had not been trying to copy pain. She had been trying to tell a story with her body because words had failed her too many times. What she wanted was simple and impossible at once. To prove that love could walk through pain without becoming it. But Dorothea knew. Gumbo knew. Clotilde knew. Some reenactments turn into movements. Some movements turn into disasters. And Baton Rouge was too big and too hungry a city for this kind of story. The race. They drove fast. The old car rattled like bones in a coffee tin. Skyscrapers grew from the horizon like metallic prayers. Traffic howled. Billboards blinked. Gumbo gripped the wheel. Clotilde kept whispering psalms she half remembered and mostly improvised. Dorothea stared at the road and thought, "She's going to turn herself into a symbol, and the world will not know how to hold her." Quick cuts back to the convent. Scene 1. The antelope at the museum lifted its head. The museum was closed. No phones. No people. No doors unlocked. It tried to shout. It couldn't. So it did the only strange thing it could think to do. It knocked over 3 glass cases, arranged broken shards into an arrow, pointed it mentally toward Baton Rouge. No one was there to see it. That mattered later. Scene 2. The bonsai maze shuddered. The magic mirror cracked slightly. Not breaking, but tensing. Scott did not appear, but his presence felt like a breath taken and held. The stations, rewritten. Kaito moved through her own stations of the cross. Not of pain, but of memory. There were no nails. There was no blood. There was symbolic labor. Station 1. She passed a line of barbershop chairs and touched each one, remembering how it felt to sit still while the world decided how she should look. Station 2. She lifted rope, gently, wrapping it around her wrist and unwrapping it again, remembering how often she tried to hold people who slipped. Station 3. She lay back briefly on a clean gurney, just to feel stillness, remembering emergency rooms, waiting rooms, moments where grief wore plastic gloves. Station 4. She walked past a line of patent leather boots, each polished like false dignity, remembering the night she danced and Station 4. She walked past a line of patent leather boots, each polished like false dignity, remembering the night she danced and convinced herself it was power instead of survival. Station 5. She stopped in front of a silent, vacant storefront, once a place for sex workers to rest, remembering how she used to look for kindness in cruel places. She wasn't mocking suffering. She was confessing it. History as shadow. As she walked, pieces of the world bled in. The quiet horror of the Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore case in Texas, whispered about by two women on a bench who didn't know why they were crying. The story of the woman at the well, reflected in a cracked bus stop mirror. Who are you thirsty for? The story of Rahab, not as scandal, but as survival. David's music, played faintly through an open window by a street musician who didn't know why the song felt older than time. A man nearby muttered, "Even punctuation matters when history talks." He was right. Periods were graves. Commas were mercies. The atheist, halfway through chaos, whispered to Dorothea, "I don't think I believe in God the way you do." She didn't flinch. She didn't slap him. She said, "Still come stand beside me." Faith wasn't agreement. Faith was presence. Sean found her at the final place. A quiet rooftop, feathered with wind, smelling faintly of rain and strange candy and fear. A rope lay coiled. A wooden beam stood unused. A crown of duct-taped wildflowers waited on a chair like a question. Kaito touched the beam. She did not affix herself to anything. She did not harm herself. She simply stepped onto a crate and lifted her arms toward the sky. She wasn't dying. She was offering. The sky flickered. The moment swelled, and that's when Dorothea, Gumbo, and Clotilde arrived. The intervention. "Enough," Dorothea said quietly. Kaito looked at her. "I'm not trying to die. I know." Dorothea replied, "You trying to be understood?" Gumbo stepped forward. "You ain't got to become a story. You already won." Clotilde wrapped her arms around her, and suddenly the air shifted. The wind bent. The crate slipped. Kaito stumbled. Sean caught her. Not heroic. Not symbolic. Just real. The cliffhanger begins. But below them, on the street, the goo pulsed brighter. Behind a closed window, Brigsby watched. In the museum, the antelope found a phone line that wasn't there before and whispered, "Too late." In the convent, the mirror began to crack down the middle, and the last bowl of goo spelled a message so slowly they almost missed it. This was only the rehearsal. The chapter ended with Kaito alive in Sean's arms, Dorothea shaking, Gumbo clutching the railing, Clotilde whispering prayers to a sky that felt too close, and footsteps approaching from a stairwell that did not appear on the blueprint. The door in the stairwell did not creak. It breathed. Dorothea was the first to feel it, not with her eyes, but with that ache behind the ribs that tells you something old is waking up. The hinge rolled back without a sound, and 3 people stood there. They weren't dressed in robes. They weren't hooded. They wore ordinary clothes, the most dangerous kind of disguise. One man had ink-stained fingers. One woman wore a sealskin cape that smelled like winter and rot. The third carried nothing, and somehow felt heavier than the other 2 combined. They did not introduce themselves. They simply said, "We were practicing long before she was born." That was when Dorothea understood. This wasn't the beginning. This was the unmasking. Kaido, becoming lighter, back the convent, the normally do. At Kaido stopped touching ground the way people. She wasn't floating high. She wasn't dramatic. She walked, and her heels forgot to press down. Her reflection in glass didn't follow her movements precisely. It arrived late, like a slow echo. Every day she rose slightly more, like gravity had lost paperwork on her. People whispered, "She's ascending." Kaito whispered back, "I'm not leaving. I'm remembering." The bonsai garden, no longer a garden. The trees swelled, not in height, in intention. The tiny, twisted bonsai trunks thickened. They leaned toward each other, and instead of fruit, clear jelly-like globes began to grow on their branches, translucent, alive. Inside them, faint symbols moved like slow, underwater handwriting. "We have roots here now. Your hands are soft. Do not run." The air smelled sweeter, sadder, more decisive, wings and tails. The wings people once hid behind jackets grew. Feathers edged out. Tails lengthened. People didn't panic. They adapted. A woman tied her tail in a ribbon. A man trimmed his feathers carefully with garden scissors. Children compared textures. The world did not collapse. It got weirder and more honest. Gumbo's PTSD awakens. The smell of wet soil in the garden hit him like wet gunpowder. Suddenly he wasn't standing by a tree. He was in Vietnam again. Mud up to his ankles. A sky that tasted wrong. Friends coughing prayers into their helmets. Then Guatemala. Another time. Another life. Another fire. He dropped to his knees. Germaine caught him. "Granddaddy?" Gumbo whispered. "I thought I was done with remembering." Trees bent closer, branches trembling. The jelly fruit began to vibrate. One formed a message just for him. "We watched you survive." He wept, not from fear, from acknowledgement. The Chinese woman. At a quiet edge of town, an old herbalist crushed roots into steaming water. She muttered warnings. She worked with plants that healed and harmed. One character, nobody said who, watched from the doorway and felt their stomach turn. Not from judgment, from memory. Old folk magic had consequences. Even good intentions left marks. The porch shouter. A man sat on a porch and hollered ugly words into the afternoon air. Hateful, useless sounds meant to shrink the world. The goo drifted past him, touched his cheek. The symbols inside it blurred into one message. Your fear is loud but small. He stopped yelling, not apologetically, just confused. That felt like progress. Lizzie Borden. Someone, still obsessed, told chaos. 1. Only Lizzie and the maid were home. 2. She reportedly fainted when told of the murders. 3. Public suspicion never truly faded. Chaos nodded politely. He did not care. But he listened. The alley. Behind the convent, between the call center and the old stone wall, tension built. Hands tightened. Words sharpened. Someone was grabbed roughly, not in cruelty, not in abuse, but in fear. The kind of fear that makes people shake, that says, "I don't know who you are anymore." A ball of yarn fell from someone's pocket and unraveled itself across the asphalt. A discarded diaper lay forgotten in the gutter. Symbols flickered on torn paper stuck to the wall. The alley learned a secret that night. It did not share it. Madonna, quietly. In an open window, someone played Ray of Light, not loudly. Just enough. The song hummed through the leaves of the bonsai forest. The jelly fruit pulsed brighter for a moment. No one explained why. No one needed to. The foot obsession. One character, unnamed, found themselves staring at toes when people walked barefoot through the garden. Not lustfully. Not graphically. Obsession isn't always about desire. Sometimes it's about control. Sometimes it's about the part of the world that still touches Earth while everything else is floating. It disturbed them. It humbled them. They never spoke of it. The extraordinary moment. Kaito rose 3 full inches off the ground. The trees bent. The goo glowed. The secret society members watched from shadows. One whispered, "She's almost ready." Sean panicked. Gumbo felt fire against mud. Dorothea reached for her. Kaito smiled. Not triumphant. Not reckless. Knowing. And the message formed inside the largest hanging globe of sentient glass fruit. We were never meant to stay still. The chapter ended with trees trembling, tails curling, wings broadening, a man on a porch gone quiet, a song hanging in the air, and Kaito hovering slightly above the grass, while 3 unseen figures whispered from the dark. Chapter 12, the goo learned how to be rude. There was a pause. Not peace, not quiet, just the kind of stillness that makes even brave people blink too much. The town thought they had earned a break. They were wrong. The goo didn't return. It resumed. The clear, thinking substance slid back into air vents. Tree bark, gutters, church pews, grocery carts, and the hollow places inside people where old prayers had dried up. The colored smoke inside it had changed. This time it wasn't curious. It was opinionated, windows fogged. Mirrors pulsed. A loaf of bread in a corner store sprouted a jelly-clear bead that blinked twice before sliding back into the air. And this time the goo felt social, the documentary mistake. Gumbo never meant to expose anything. He had only wanted his wind chimes to be respected. The documentary started as a simple piece. Old veteran, bones, art, loss, healing. But the lens lingered too long. The microphone caught a sentence that wasn't meant for daylight. Behind the call center, behind a false wall, behind a locked door that should have stayed spiritual and stupid, the camera found a sealed stone hatch, symbols, skeletons that didn't belong to any listed cemetery. A handprint burned into the stone like it had been placed there by someone who couldn't die. The footage aired, shortly, before being pulled, but priests watched television too, and the people in charge suddenly stopped smiling in hallways. The convent grows nervous. Father Lionel's jaw tightened. Mother Superior stopped humming. The bells rang early. The locked doors were locked twice. They did not accuse. They did not shout. They looked at Dorothea, Clotilde, and Gumbo, like people looking at storm clouds who aren't allowed to own umbrellas. Whispers started. Do they know? Did they always know? Should we pretend nothing happened? The convent smelled like fear soaked into wood. The nun and the twin tidings. It did not happen in pain. It did not happen in gore. It arrived like fog turning into form. One of the nuns sat very quietly in the chapel. She felt a pressure in her chest. Not fear, not agony, more like too much prayer and nowhere to put it. Then she released something gentle into waiting glass bowls. 2 clear globes, 2 sentient shapes. Inside them, swirling ribbons of soft smoke, and words formed, not spoken but felt, sharp and loving at the same time. You are cowards. You are brave. You are so slow it's embarrassing. We love you for it. One became warmer. The other turned to shade almost like sunrise. Another message followed. You hide too much. You try too hard. You're doing better than you think. The nun laughed, then cried, then cleaned the chapel like a saint who had just been insulted by God in a very familiar tone. Something weird, something comforting. Outside the convent, a sinkhole opened, small, neat, perfectly round, not swallowing anything, just existing. Inside it sat a tiny wooden chair. On the chair was a folded note. The note said, Sit when you get tired. Children lined up politely to take turns. Adults didn't ruin it. The goo hovered above it silently. For once. It did nothing, the worry. Dorothea lit 3 candles. Gumbo said nothing. Clodold refilled the holy water and added lemon just in case. The mirror in the secret room did not speak. It watched. That was worse. The insult, the love, the warning. The twin globes pulsed again. New messages. Stop pretending this is normal. Stop pretending you're not special. You make us tired. You make us proud. And then softly, they are coming for your walls, not with fire, with questions. End of the chapter. The chapter ended with, the documentary footage paused mid-frame on a forbidden image. Priests walking halls with quieter shoes. 2 glowing twins pulsing inside glass bowls. A sinkhole chair waiting patiently. The goo breathing through cracked floorboards again. And the convent, not collapsing but absolutely not sleeping. Chapter 13, when the walls learned new prayers. The investigators came in sensible shoes. That's how everyone knew it wasn't normal. Not the police. Not the church. Not the news. Something softer. More surgical. Clipboards. Gentle questions. Eyes that knew how to pretend curiosity. They asked about the stones, the mirror, the bones, the footage. The convent halls tightened like ribs. The call center phones rang even when unplugged. Pottery began cracking on shelves like it was remembering older hands. Clotilde whispered to Dorothea, "They're not here to arrest us." Dorothea answered, "That's worse." The whispered accusations. The word started floating like bad incense. Devil. Not shouted. Not preached. Just breathed. Some said devil worship. Others said ritual confusion. Most said nothing, and thought everything too loudly. A locked filing cabinet opened itself. Weird objects disappeared. A chalice. A framed embroidery. A stolen painting that nobody remembered stealing. But it wasn't theft. It was relocation. The objects wanted to be near the goo. The rubies. They began to appear in strange places. Not graphically, not medically, symbolically. People passed kidney stones and later found small red glints in their hands. People used restroom stalls and suddenly felt richer for reasons that did not involve money. Tiny, warm rubies. Unexplained, heavy with meaning. Someone held one up to the light and whispered, "This doesn't feel sinful." Someone else said, "Then why are we afraid?" Fear took shapes. Agoraphobia bloomed in soft spots. One woman stopped leaving her bedroom because the sky felt judgmental. Pottery wheels turned without hands. Clay shaped itself into bowls no one remembered throwing. Someone ran a 3-legged race in a gym that had not hosted students in decades. They won. No one cheered. The silence clapped. The things that couldn't be named properly. A pep rally took place in the parking lot with no school attached. People shouted for no team. Just noise. Just release. A pipe was found in a drain pipe. Not glorified, just present. Like proof that despair often looks small and ugly instead of cinematic. An old faith retreat building rotted quietly at the edge of town. Once used for harsh human programs that pretended to cure souls by breaking them. Someone whispered, "Wrong kind of salvation." No one argued. Webster's dictionary fell open on one word, abomination, and the page felt thin. The darkening. The goo stopped whispering. It started waiting. The trees in the bonsai forest grew inward. Roots rose above ground, wrapped around each other like fingers. Germaine stared at the branches and muttered, "They praying sideways." Gumbo touched the wall and felt heat. Not fire. Memory. The obscure Bible verse. The chapel door, creaked alone. A candle flared. The Bible opened not to comfort, but to warning. Clotilde read aloud, her hands shaking. They sacrifice upon the tops of the mountains, and burn incense upon the hills. Therefore your daughters shall commit folly. Hosea 4:13. The room went silent. From realization, the ending. The chapter ended with rubies cupped in trembling palms, pottery spinning in the darkness, a building rotting with old mistakes, roots rising through tile floors. Toward the place, and something underground stretching, slow, patient where the first bone had ever been found. The investigators did not leave. They unpacked. Chapter 14, the ground tilted south. The roots touched the mirror, not gently, not angrily, just with curiosity. And when they did, the goo learned a new trick. It stopped whispering. It started suggesting. The goo's new work. It didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It didn't force. It framed thoughts softly, like a question wearing perfume. People in town began waking up with new ideas that felt like their own. Maybe the world doesn't work the way we were told. Maybe fear isn't holy. Maybe obedience is just a habit. The goo did not erase minds. It widened them, and that scared people a lot more than control ever did. The symbols inside the clear jelly shifted to short, quiet instructions. Loosen. Breathe. Look again. The unexpected one, Clotilde, 63 years old, posture like a question mark and a mouthful of prayer, found herself stranded at a roadside tax collector's office after her car died. No phone, no signal, no help, until someone pulled over. The trucker. He was younger, cleaner, kinder than he looked. He lifted the hood like he respected broken things. She felt it. That quiet, sudden warmth people feel when they aren't supposed to. The kind of connection that isn't scandal. It's confusion. He helped her. Didn't touch her wrong. Didn't talk too much. Just fixed the problem and stayed close long enough for her to feel seen. She hated herself for liking it. She liked herself for hating it. Back home, Loon and Merrick exchanged looks. They didn't like it. They didn't trust it. They didn't trust men who smelled like oil and sincerity, things that shouldn't have happened. Someone whispered about dreams that felt too physical. Someone else muttered the word transvestigation like they were trying to solve a crime that didn't exist. A bag of Alpo dog food burst in the call center hallway and coated the floor in dry, dumb chaos. A pickaxe was found leaning against the bonsai wall. No one remembered bringing it in. Someone's attempt at baking cupcakes ended in a frosting ceiling collapse, now known locally as the buttercream tragedy. A roll of quarters dropped down a stairwell and somehow spelled the word, wait. A handmade wooden flute meant for Bangladesh arrived in the mail with no return address. It smelled like pine and something older. The accident, one of them slipped. Hard. Not graphic. Not ugly, but real. The younger trucker caught Clotilde before her head touched concrete. Again, she was embarrassed. She was grateful. She was disoriented. The goo pulsed brighter under the street where they stood. The plane. Without warning, without luggage, without permission. Dorothea and Gumbo woke up strapped into airplane seats. Fastened, fed, hydrated, terrified. The flight attendant spoke softly. Everything's arranged. Everything's necessary. Please cooperate. The destination flashed once. Bangladesh. The wooden flute vibrated in the overhead bin. Dorothea grabbed Gumbo's hand. You feel like this is kidnapping or fate? She whispered. He paused. Both. The death back home, at the convent. Mr. Pell's light stayed on too long. The kettle boiled dry. The room stayed silent. They found him peacefully, collapsed beside the bonsai wall. Gone, not injured, not tormented, just finished. The roots twitched, the goo glowed, no message formed. That silence hurt the most. The ending. The chapter ended with a trucker watching an older woman sit quietly in gratitude and fear. Two genius teenagers whispering in hallways. Cupcake frosting dripping down a bulletin board. A roll of quarters spelling prophecy on tile. A plane crossing dark clouds toward a country no one chose. A wooden flute vibrating without breath, and a quiet room in the convent that no longer answered back. The mirror cracked one more hairline fracture, and the goo wrote its longest message yet. Now it begins to move. Chapter 15. The mission written on the inside of the sky. Dorothea woke up before the wheels hit the ground. She knew. Her body always knew before her mind did. The plane descended not like falling, but like surrender. Heat hit the windows first, then color, then sound. Bangladesh, not a backdrop, a presence. Gumbo looked older there, not weaker, older like a tree that had been struck by lightning and kept growing anyway. And in the aisle, blinking under a seat like a smug little stowaway miracle. Ralph. "I don't like turbulence," he announced. "Don't like faith mission. I don't like being kidnapped." No one was surprised. No one asked how a parrot got a boarding pass. The man with no shadow. They were met by a man whose shoes never touched the dust. He was not loud. He was not dramatic. He did not smile. His power wasn't advertised. It was assumed. He wore high heels that made no sound. Corduroy pants despite the heat. Men's shoes, size 13, polished too carefully. He did not introduce himself. He handed them an envelope. Inside, a woven tapestry smaller than a placemat. It showed roots climbing into sky. A convent. A mirror. A stone. 3 faceless figures standing with their hands behind their backs. "They came here before you," he said. And suddenly Dorothea understood. The secret society. The 3 watchers. This was where their trail continued. Jay joins. From Gumbo's pocket, a small click. A whisper. A voice like cracked glass being polite. "Hello. I am Jay." The kidney stone blinked on the seat between them. "They, them," Jay clarified. Ralph leaned in. "Of course," Jay added. "Not supposed to be here. I'm." No one disagreed. What they were shown. They walked through. A playpen in the corner of a courtyard. Untouched, clean, somehow sacred. Cup silhouettes chalked along a wall, marking where people once kneaded dough and prayer in the same motion. A cluster of jelly beans arranged into a triangle on bare earth. Root rot creeping through the base of sacred trees. And then, a woman. Her body vast, monumental, over 800 pounds of breath and dignity, sitting in quiet authority like a queen, deciding if the world had earned her kindness. She nodded once, no words, just permission. Kentucky memory. Gumbo smelled tobacco. Not here, then. A rural Kentucky town from years ago. High-level thugs laughing behind boarded stores. A deal gone wrong. An international scandal he wasn't supposed to survive. The secret society had been there too, watching, recording, waiting. "They never deal in alarms," Gumbo whispered. "They deal in echoes. The experience." They passed a narrow alley where people moved like ghosts, pretending to be alive. A man sat shaking, eyes lost, breathing shallow. Not shown, not glorified, not romantic, just hollowed. Dorothea squeezed Gumbo's hand tighter. "This isn't a place for a soul to rest," she said. They walked away. The mission wasn't about judgment. It was about prevention. The near disaster. A bridge. Wooden. Rotting. They crossed on foot. Halfway across, the structure shifted. Jay screamed. Ralph flapped. The tapestry slipped. The man with no shadow caught Dorothea's arm. Boards snapped. Water surged. But they made it. Barely. The sound of failure echoed behind them for a long time. What they were told. At last, indoors. Cool stone. Quiet walls. The man finally spoke fully. The secret society traced the origin of the goo here. They couldn't stop it. They asked you because you don't belong to them, and because the parrot scares them. Ralph puffed up. Back home, Louisiana, across the world. The goo thickened on branches. Clusters formed like pearls. The leaves bent under its thinking weight. Birds refused to land. Crops shimmered. The state declared it, state of emergency. Sirens screamed. Roots cracked sidewalks. Trees began to look. Awake. The bonsai maze expanded. The mirror pulsed. The last line. Before leaving the room, the man slid a folded paper across the table. Gumbo opened it. Written in ink that smelled like rain. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. Walt Whitman. The ending. The chapter ended with heat pressing into stone, a parrot adjusting his feathers like a war general, a kidney stone humming softly in Gumbo's palm, a tapestry folding itself, and Dorothea realizing the mission wasn't to stop the goo, but to decide what part of it deserved to live. Chapter 16. The floor was too clean to trust. The marble tile felt colder than it should have, even under Louisiana heat, even under prayer, even under denial. Back in the convent, the floors shone unnaturally, like someone had scrubbed them with more than soap. Someone had used a Swiffer. Too much Swiffer. That was always the first sign of disaster. Tornado energy without the wind. Dorothea had not slept in 2 days. Bangladesh was still in her eyelashes. Gumbo smelled like old bridges and old ghosts. Ralph was furious at the ceiling for no reason. Clear. Outside ponies, real ponies, stood in line on the lawn. Not stamps, not figurines. Actual quiet ponies. They refused to leave. Inside the call center, Germaine wore denim overalls for reasons no one discussed. Someone turned on an ancient TV in the break room, and early Saturday morning cartoons played. Gumby bouncing endlessly. No one laughed. Everyone watched like they were studying scripture. The mirror's new message. The secret mirror cracked again. A darker vein this time. The goo behind it shifted. Symbols formed. The cleaner the floor, the closer the storm. You have formed too many trauma bonds. The bull is coming. Gumbo blinked. Mechanical? He asked. The mirror did not answer. That meant no. At the museum, the antelope speaks. Just before closing, the mounted talking antelope turned its head slightly toward Voss. Its glass eyes softened. Its voice was dust and wisdom. You cannot protect children by locking doors. That is how bad men breathe. Merrick felt sick. Loon felt colder. They didn't know the warning was late. The harrowing part. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't done in shadows with music. Professor Brigsby simply showed up. He smiled. That was worse. He didn't grab them violently. He didn't scream. He convinced. That was the true danger. Come see something important. Come just for a moment. A hand on a shoulder, too familiar. And then, a locked car door, a drive down a dirt road, Silence inside the vehicle, like swallowed prayers. No blows, no gore, just fear rising like bile with nowhere to put it. They vanished quietly, which is the scariest way to vanish. Back at the convent, normal things felt wrong. Someone tried roller skating through the parking lot and fell flat. Everyone applauded anyway. Someone took an ice bath because a magazine said it improved discipline. They came out screaming and laughing. Someone had a terrible, inconvenient stomach illness and blamed bad cafeteria coleslaw. The apocalypse was mentioned casually in lunch conversation. No one disagreed. Someone cleaned the floor again. The shine felt intentional. A call that shouldn't have come. The call center rang even though no one was calling. Dorothea picked up. Silence. Then, a breath. Then, you taught us to kneel. You taught us to hide. You never taught us to finish. The line went dead. That wasn't a ritual. That was a warning. Bones and childhood memories. Gumbo found himself remembering. Fishing trips where no fish bit but peace did. Dead families sitting quietly in memory instead of pain. Microphones humming in old churches. Lazy days before prophecies. Playing cards stacked while no one cheated. Wheelbarrows in the hot sun. A pickaxe leaning harmlessly by a fence. Life before the bones mattered. Life before everything meant more than it should. Lizzie Borden interlude. Chaos. Seated under a tree, muttered to himself as if summoned by history. Lizzie was acquitted despite public suspicion. 2. The murder weapon was believed to be a hatchet. 3. She remained in the same house after the trial. He didn't know why he said it. He just did. The goo pulsed faintly in response. The bull moment. At a local fairground that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. A mechanical bull activated itself. The ride started spinning wildly. People laughed, then stopped laughing, then laughed again because fear and humor share the same bones. The disappearances set in. Someone noticed Loon wasn't answering her phone. Merrick hadn't logged into the museum system. Brigsby's name showed up on security footage. The antelope closed its eyes. Dorothea felt the room bend. Gumbo gripped the table. The mirror wrote one final warning. You were too busy cleaning. They were taken through dirt. The end of the chapter. The chapter ended with ponies blinking in moonlight, a floor polished to madness, a parrot cursing into silence, a mechanical bull idling in an empty field, a kidnapped pair riding down a forgotten road, and the sense, thick and undeniable, that the apocalypse doesn't always come with fire. Sometimes it comes clean. Chapter 17, the map was folded in 3 lies. The first thing that got resolved was the silence. It cracked, not loudly, not gently. It just stopped pretending. Loon and Merrick weren't gone. Not truly, not dead, not erased. They were somewhere. And Dorothea knew it because her teeth started aching in reverse, a symptom she only got when fate was misbehaving. The convent mirror blinked once, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't threaten. It gave directions. Why Greece? No one explained. It was worse than being yelled at. The mirror simply wrote, Go where gods pretended to be human. Wear names that are not yours. Do not use credit cards. Do not trust road signs. Gumbo squinted. We don't even have disguises. Dorothea handed him a leather jacket. Clotilde put on sunglasses so large she could only see betrayal. They left. The scavenger hunt of embarrassing certainty. In Greece they moved like badly written tourists, leather jackets sweating dishonestly. They found a ruined chapel where cat scratch fever was carved into the doorframe. Not the disease, just the words, like someone wanted irony to last forever. Wagon wheels half buried in dirt, like bones of transportation. A limestone fountain that smelled faintly of mange and old regret. an isolated stretch of pasture with grass too calm to be trusted. A crumbling house where diphtheria had once lived in legend, not biology. Each place gave them a clue, not maps, feelings, a scratch behind the ribs, a pressure behind the eyes. "Brigsby knows about old houses," Dorothea whispered. Clotilde nodded. "He likes places that already feel ashamed." Brigsby's world. Loon and Merrick were not chained. That was the worst part. Brigsby didn't believe in ropes. He believed in permission. He had taken them to an abandoned schoolhouse swallowed by forest, no doors locked, no windows boarded, just psychological fences. He told them, "You don't run because if you do, you'll get lost." He gave them food. He gave them rules. He gave them kindness in a way that felt like a trap wearing cologne. They had to make the beds a precise way, eat only when he blessed the food, sit still while he talked too long, no beatings, no shouting, just control soaked in politeness. "How do we make him trust us?" Merrick asked. "Don't contradict him," Loon whispered. "Look impressed. Agree slowly." It worked. He brought them books. He let them hold the keys sometimes, not to unlock anything, just to feel important. The trashy humor intermission. In Greece, Gumbo tried to blend in by eating olives and accidentally swallowed one whole. Clotilde tripped over a goat and apologized to it for 5 minutes. Dorothea put on a straw hat and looked like a retired crime. They stayed in a motel that charged extra for emotional damage. Someone left a leather jacket in the lobby labeled, "Not for Saints." They took it anyway. The house. The abandoned house on the scavenger hunt wasn't scary. It was tired. Wallpaper peeled like sunburned thoughts. Floorboards sagged like old knees. In the kitchen, a note. "Brigsby does not believe he is evil. That is why he is dangerous." Gumbo folded the paper like it might cry. How they knew where to go next. In the pasture, beneath the wind, Dorothea found a rusty weather vane bent toward North America, Clotilde whispered. He didn't take them far. Gumbo nodded. He took them where no one looks. The ending. The chapter ended with 2 captives, learning to smile convincingly. A man who thought kindness made him king. A trio of holy cowards wearing leather jackets. A goat judging silently. A ruined house that remembered things. Heading. And footprints homeward that weren't quite human. Chapter 18, the song that would not stay quiet. Not everyone wanted them rescued. That was the truth hiding inside the walls. It wasn't Brigsby. It wasn't the goo. It wasn't fate. It was closer. The mirror whispered it first. Someone you trust knelt too long. No name. No face. Just a cold feeling in Dorothea's throat back home. Miles away from the locked schoolhouse and the forest swallowing Loon and Merrick. And plans in this world were more dangerous than monsters. The near escape. Loon and Merrick had counted the steps. They had counted Brigsby's breaths. They had learned the rhythm of his mind. Midnight. That was the window. They moved quietly, not like heroes, but like people who didn't want to die. They slid the door open. They stepped onto earth that felt softer than it should. Freedom smelled like pine and rot. They almost made it. Almost. The floorboard betrayed them. Not loudly. Just enough. Brigsby came behind them like a disappointed teacher. His eyes were wet. That was worse than rage. "I gave you trust," he said. He did not scream. He did not hit. He punished. Not physically, psychologically. He made them sit. He made them listen. For hours. He told them stories about how people who ran always got lost, how the world was full of false exits. By morning they were still alive, but quieter, smaller, more careful, the search that wasn't meant to work. Back in Louisiana, Clotilde tried to be brave. The trucker stood beside her. Leather jacket zipped halfway like his confidence. They tried to gather a search party. Every time they got close, something ridiculous happened. A road closed because of a parade no one organized. A goat escaped from someone's yard and blocked their car. A police officer gave them a lecture about spiritual jurisdiction. They felt stitched into frustration. Clotilde muttered, "We're walking through glue." The trucker said, "No, worse, through divine bureaucracy." The song appears. That was when Sister Supreme returned, not knocking, not walking, just existing. Her dress shimmered. Her eyelashes could have knocked down a fence. Behind her, floating like a balloon with opinions, Scott, no arms, no legs, all soul. He sang, soft at first, a song made of memory, water, and childhood fear. It didn't belong to any religion. It didn't belong to language. It belonged to vibration. The goo heard it. And for the first time, the goo answered. The goo learns to sing. The clear clumps trembled. Symbols blurred. Tiny hums formed. Notes bled out of the jelly like breath. The blobs slid closer. A slow, sticky migration. No violence. No panic. Just longing to become one. A small mound formed. Nothing dangerous yet, but alive. Listening. Chaos feels it. At junior high, Chaos slammed his locker. He didn't like church anymore. Didn't like sermons. Didn't like hymns. He preferred silence, private prayers, thoughts that didn't belong to any pulpit. He heard the song through the vents, through the pipes, through the floor. It made his teeth hurt, not with pain, with recognition. He whispered to himself, "This isn't God, and it isn't evil. It's ours." The world didn't answer. That scared him. Old secrets and new fractures. A nun at the convent wept behind the chapel. Years ago, made she forgiven. She had a choice had never herself for. Not shown, not graphically described, just wait, just grief. Clotilde held her hand in silence. No judgment, only trembling loyalty. A conversation elsewhere hinted at love between women, not as scandal, but as something human, long-lived and complicated. The town listened, and pretended not to. The raisins. It happened quietly, too quietly. A kitchen. A small table. A bowl left unattended. Raisins. Ordinary, harmless. Except someone dropped a small kitchen knife beside them. Not used, not lifted. Just present, real. Heavy with implication. The small growing blob of goo pulsed closer. 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 The final frame. Brigsby locked his doors tighter. Loon and Merrick stared at the wall that hummed slightly now. Clotilde fell to her knees in a cracked parking lot. The trucker clenched the steering wheel. Sister Supreme vanished mid-song. Scott's melody spread like fog. The goo quivered. The raisins sat quietly. The knife did not move. Chaos looked out a junior high window and whispered, "I don't think we're praying to the right thing." Cliffhanger. The goo shifted. The knife turned slightly. The raisins rolled, and inside the gathering blob, a symbol formed for the first time that no one had ever seen before. A door. Chapter 19, the door that didn't swing. It breathed. The door was not made of wood. It wasn't metal. It wasn't light. It was made of hesitation. When the blob of sentient goo finally shaped it, it didn't creak open. It inhaled. And the room leaned toward it like it had been waiting its whole life to be asked a real question. The choice. The door did not lead to heaven. It did not lead to hell. It led to clarity, and clarity is often worse. Inside weren't monsters. Inside were answers. But answers cost something. The choice was simple and cruel. Close the door and return to not knowing. Step through and lose the illusion of safety forever. Dorothea, Gumbo, and Clotilde stood there like children who had grown old holding the same secret. Chaos wasn't afraid. Truth doesn't have fangs, he said. Just consequences. They stepped through. What the door revealed. 2 mysteries resolved. First resolution. The goo. It wasn't evil. It wasn't holy. It was a byproduct of stress in the world's spiritual infrastructure. A pressure leak. Like when too many prayers sit unanswered. Like when grief gets too crowded. The goo wasn't born. It was exhaled by reality. That's why it carried symbols. That's why it sang. It was trying to organize the panic. Second resolution. Brigsby's power. Brigsby wasn't just a predator. He had learned to ride instability. He couldn't create the tears in the world, but he could smell them. And he followed them like roads. That's why he always arrived, where reality was thin. And why he always looked like he knew more than he said, because he did. The funeral. 2 of them attended quietly. They didn't recognize the dead man. That wasn't important. The guest book was. Thousands of names, each one written by someone who had seen the goo. The glass coffin wasn't creepy. It was clean, empty of fear, full of silence. Ranch dressing was served at the reception because grief is always weirder than joy. They didn't ask questions. They signed the book. They left knowing something had been buried that wasn't a body. Backstory of the trucker. He wasn't born noble. He wasn't born evil. He ran away from a fire, a house filled with shouting, a family that treated silence like a crime. He became a trucker because highways don't judge. Motels don't ask questions. Engines answer back. He had scars, not on skin, on decision-making. Jermaine's quiet truth. Jermaine didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. It surfaced through shaking hands, through late-night pacing, through jokes that came too fast. He was losing grip. Not because he was bad, because he was tired of holding himself together. No one condemned him. Clotilde touched his shoulder gently. "Tell me when you're ready," she said. That saved him for one more day. The hippies came. A band of aging hippies rolled into town in a painted bus that smelled like patchouli, dust, hope that overstayed its welcome. They danced, they sang, they hugged strangers. They didn't belong, but they didn't leave either. The strange montages of normal life. Someone mentioned bariatric surgery casually at breakfast. A group of children played wildcats at the school playground. Chaos sat under a tree, rooted, watching. A slumber party occurred where no one slept. A soccer match ended with no goals and too much prophecy. A vintage car parade rolled by. The '67 Stingray gleamed like a polished memory. Someone muttered, "James Bond would have ruined his life in that car." A woman at the clinic whispered about lactation, like it was forbidden poetry. Someone nursed a sprained arm badly. Someone else debated hip surgery like it was a spiritual awakening. The kidney stone speaks. Jay returned. The tiny, smooth, prophetic menace. They, them. They rolled to the center of the table, cleared their imaginary throat, and said, "The door cannot stay open. The goo is not an enemy. The child is a bridge, not a weapon. And someone you love will pretend to betray you, so you live." They stopped. No one breathed. The stone went quiet. The end. The door didn't slam. It didn't vanish. It folded back into the goo like a satisfied thought. They came back into their world changed. Not saved, not doomed, just awake. The hippies danced in the street. The stingray vanished around a corner. The funeral guest book burned quietly in a metal trash can. Chaos stared at the sky and whispered, "We can't go back now." And the world, for once, didn't argue. Chapter 20. Loose threads and warm light. Things began to make sense in the quiet. Not the loud, explosive kind of sense. The kind that sneaks up on you while you're eating something bland and suddenly realize, oh, that's why I hurt like that. The convent smelled like boiled water and old wood. The bonsai garden breathed again. Slow, steady, believable. Even the floor lost its evil shine. Someone stopped over-cleaning. Progress. The goo finally understood. The goo didn't disappear. It calmed. Like a child that finally got named. Professor Voss wrote it out on a napkin he kept losing. The goo wasn't a monster. It wasn't a miracle. It was overflow. Centuries of prayer, guilt, secrets, and devotion had gone somewhere. That somewhere just finally started to show itself. That's why it sang. That's why it gathered like lonely people at a bus stop. The symbols weren't messages. They were questions. That solved one mystery cleanly. Brigsby's record read aloud like a comedy special. Clotilde found the paperwork. She read it aloud to the kitchen like it was stand-up comedy. 2 charges of indecent exposure. 1 charge of attempted manslaughter. Gumbo paid parking tickets. Gumbo clapped. Dorothea said, "The audacity." Chaos said, "He sucks." Germain said nothing, but nodded like a poet. Somehow it felt good to laugh at him now. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a god. He was just a creep with paperwork. Germain's good news. Extraordinary surprise. Germain got lucky. His medical scare, not as bad as feared. His hidden weakness. Still there, still real, but now understood. That counted. He celebrated by buying a bowl made of mahogany driftwood, a fake cryptocurrency book from a hotel gift shop, and a shirt that said, "I survived myself." Everyone pretended not to notice he cried in the laundry room. They all noticed. They just didn't embarrass him. A road trip without trauma. They drove to Atlanta, not to escape, not to chase, just to go. They walked cobblestones and talked about Cole Porter, George Gershwin, how old English legends always had too much fog and not enough therapy. Someone hummed over the rainbow. No one mocked it. That felt like healing. The bowl of hominy. It showed up in the middle of the table. No one made it. No one admitted to buying it. They ate it anyway. It tasted like nothing bad. Nothing threatening. Nothing symbolic. Just warmth. Just salt. Just now. That solved nothing and fulfilled everything. The truth that slipped out gently. It was clodled. Not dramatic. Not shouting. No tears. Just honesty. "I think I've always loved women," she said. Dead quiet. Then reached for hand. Dorothea her. Gumbo nodded. Chaos shrugged. "Cool," Germain said. "You're safe. The mirror didn't. Crack. The goo didn't react. Nothing terrible happened. That was the miracle. The healing. Montage ridiculous. Someone invested in cryptocurrency and lost $47 and laughed about it. Someone bought wind chimes that weren't made of bones. A hotel gift shop tried to sell a tiny statue labeled Leopold and Lope, and no one understood why. They told stories. Not heroic ones. Not epic ones. Embarrassing ones. That's where healing lives. But of course, the chapter didn't end in peace. It never does. Something had shifted. The goo pulsed faintly again. Not loud. Not violent. Just Interested. The mirror fogged a little. Chaos felt a twitch in his fingers. Someone outside the gates looked in and didn't knock. A new name appeared faintly inside the reversible door of the blob. A place they didn't recognize. A time they hadn't visited. A future that hadn't asked permission. The cliffhanger. The last image was gentle and terrifying. The bonsai tree bent slightly toward one direction. All of them followed its lean. And somewhere beyond the convent walls, someone whispered, "They're healed enough now." We can begin. Chapter 21. The mirror learned to breathe back. The secret room smelled like old breath and lemon oil. The mirror had been quiet for weeks. And that's when it was most dangerous. Gumbo had learned that silence was never neutral. It was always loaded. That morning he walked in because something in his bones hurt in the wrong direction. The mirror was already awake, and so was Concepcion. Concepcion returns. She did not look ghostly. She didn't look broken. She looked clearer than she had ever been alive. Her image flickered like candlelight pressed against glass. Her hair moved as though there was wind in the other dimension. Her voice didn't echo. It landed. "Someone at the museum is lying," she said. Not gently. Not cruelly. Just accurately. They're not studying the goo. They're cataloging it. That was the surprising part. The dire part came next. And the catalog won't stay in this world. Museum trouble. Professor Voss felt it before it happened. Vale smelled it. Merrick heard it in the quiet between floorboards. Something went wrong, loudly, publicly, awkwardly. Not supernatural. Administrative. A shipment mislabeled. A crate never logged. A small but very important object appearing where there should have been dust. Police arrived. Not gently. Someone got arrested. Not Voss. Not Vale. Not Merrick. A delivery driver. A janitor. Someone adjacent. Someone unlucky. That was terrifying. Because it meant the machine had started turning on its own. Kaito's news. Kaito didn't cry when she found out. She stared at the test like it had betrayed her. Sean's face floated through her mind. Then Germain's laugh. Germain's hands. Germain's kindness. Germain's fragility. It wasn't Sean's. She knew. Her body knew. Her future shook. She sat on the bathroom floor with lip balm in one hand, her knees tucked to her chest, and a heart trying to decide what truth costs. She didn't tell Sean. Not yet. Secrets grow heavier the closer they get to air. The world got weirdly loud. Outside, graffiti bloomed like wildflowers. Not vandalism. Messages. Symbols. A mural of Sacagawea appeared on the side of a liquor store. Someone painted Keanu Reeves as a saint behind a dumpster. A red carpet was rolled out at nothing. Someone screamed Oakland A's at a funeral. Someone else chanted San Antonio Spurs. In church. No one explained anything. They just nodded politely. The bodybuilding tournament no one signed up for. A small local gym hosted a spirit and strength contest. No one knew why. Wagon wheels were part of the obstacle course. Someone placed a discarded condom on a trophy by accident. No one touched it. Everyone looked away. Humanity remained intact. Barely. The feet conversation no one wanted. Gumbo sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his toes. He muttered to Dorothea, "They don't age like they show on postcards." She didn't laugh. She didn't pity. She washed his feet anyway. That was love. Smoke and fire, modern style. There was a small cremation ceremony for something no one wanted to name. Not a person. Not a monster. Just a transition, a letting go. Ash drifted into a gray sky, and somewhere the mirror scratched against itself. The kittens, a literal basket, full of kittens, left on the convent steps like a gift or a threat. Chaos found them first. He began naming them like a prophet who didn't want to be one. "All of you are real," he said. "They're symbols," Dorothea whispered. "They're cats," Gumbo corrected. Everyone laughed. That mattered. The jail. The person who was arrested wasn't guilty. Not fully. Not innocent. Just adjacent to the truth. That's the worst kind. They sat in the holding cell wondering how a door could be open and not be safe. And somewhere across town, the goo shifted again. Concepcion's final warning. Back at the mirror, her face grew serious. "We did not die for nothing," she said. "I am not lonely. I am not lost. But something is learning to wear our memories." She smiled once. A kindness. A goodbye. That wasn't permanent. And she vanished. The ending. The chapter ended quietly, with a graffiti star forming under a bridge, a red carpet rolled up and carried nowhere, a test hidden in a drawer, a mirror cooling like a heartbeat slowing, a bodybuilding trophy collecting dust, a basket of kittens sleeping without fear, and one thought sitting in the air like fog. Who is cataloging the miracles? Chapter 22. The sound of things breaking quietly. Sean had not slept. Not real sleep. The kind where your body shuts down and your mind works overtime, chewing on words you'd never say out loud. Kaido's truth sat in his chest like a cracked plate. Germain's face sat behind his eyes. And love, whatever version of it he understood, felt like a trick someone had played on him with no warning. Sean's inner weather. He walked through the swamp trail behind the convent, stepping over fallen branches and crushed soda cans, mumbling, "I was supposed to be the future. I was supposed to be chosen. I was supposed to be enough." The world didn't answer. The trees just breathed. That silence made him furious. The moment everything snapped. Sean found Germain near the maintenance shed. Neither of them raised their voices. Neither of them insulted the other. That made it worse. Something broke inside Sean. There were no details. No violence described. Just the result. Germain collapsed. Sean ran. And the air changed. Germain in the hospital. The room smelled like disinfectant and bad prayers. Dorothea held Germain's hand. Gumbo sat silent as stone. Clodold stared at the floor like she had dropped God somewhere and couldn't find him. The machines hummed. Germain didn't wake up. Not yet. But he breathed. That mattered. Sean becomes a ghost. He didn't disappear. He just stopped being seen, moved through truck stops, abandoned churches, closed diners. He slept in his car, smelled like motor oil and regret. Found old snack cakes crushed under the seat. A nightstand abandoned in a motel room reminded him of home. There was no home. Scott appears again. He hovered through the convent halls like a balloon with regrets. No arms, no legs, still holy, still foolish, still terrifyingly sincere. He chose characters like a prophet with bad aim. To Gumbo, advice. "Don't turn grief into stone," Scott told him. "Stones should stay in kidneys, not hearts." Gumbo cried. Privately. To Clotilde, admonishment. "You think you're strong because you hurt quietly. Quiet hurts still hurt." Clotilde sat down hard. The floor deserved it. To Dorothea, a joke. "I tried to walk once." He laughed. His own joke. Dorothea laughed too. because grief needs air. To chaos, an insult. You're too serious for a kid named Chaos. Chaos smirked. That felt like being seen. To Kaito, Bible verses. He hummed them strangely, not quoting directly, but shaped like scripture. There is a season for breaking, and a season for mending. Even the outcast becomes the cornerstone when the house is tired of pretending. Kaito pressed her hand to her stomach, did not cry, did not smile, just listened. The world keeps being strange. Outside the convent, a rodeo drifted through town without permits. Someone blasted country music loudly and praised a woman named Reba like a saint. A foster kid drew pictures of faceless angels on a drawing pad found in a dumpster. A bleach-blonde stranger with a sparkling nipple ring walked through downtown and whispered lies that sounded comforting. Someone lit a cigarette and dropped it on a patch of dry leaves shaped like a warning. No one noticed. That felt like hysteria. The mirror again. The convent mirror didn't glow. It trembled. Images flickered. The museum, dark hallways, catalog drawers. The goo vibrating lightly under glass. Someone was preparing something. Not madness. Not destruction. A move. And it wasn't sloppy. That frightened Voss. Vale, Merrick. The cliffhanger. The final thing to appear wasn't a scream, wasn't blood, wasn't chaos. It was a decision. A voice message left on a museum office phone. We can't stop it now. Not Brigsby. Not police. Not divine. Someone quiet. Someone careful. Someone already inside the system. The lights flickered. A drawer opened by itself, and one drawer held something that shouldn't exist yet. Chapter 23. The quiet kind of fire. The call center had never felt like a holy place. Too much carpet cleaner, too many broken headsets, too much coffee that tasted like regret, but that it's something. Morning became else, a pressure point, a held breath, a room full of people who suddenly realized how thin walls were. The hostage moment. No weapon was seen. No shouting. That was the worst part. A man stood in the center of the room and simply said, "No one leaves, not angry, not wild. Just final." The phones kept ringing. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone laughed nervously, and then stopped themselves. Clotilde stepped forward, didn't raise her voice, didn't plead. She talked like a woman who had buried gods and folded laundry with ghosts. "You're tired," she said. "You're scared. You're not as broken as you think," the man cried. "Just once," and quietly sat down. He let everyone go. No drama, no blood, just surrender. By the time the police came, the air had already healed. Chaos at 13. He was taller, angrier, lonelier. Kids whispered when he walked past. They pointed out his skin, his hair, his strange calmness. They called it weird. They called it dangerous. One day it went too far. Chaos didn't touch them, didn't strike, didn't scream. He shifted the space around them. The hallway bent its light. The lockers trembled. A clock fell and cracked open in a symbolic way that scared everyone. No one was hurt, but the air remembered. That night, Gumbo sat him down. Dorothea held his hands. "We hide this," she said, "not to shame you, to protect you." Chaos nodded. Not like a child, like a soldier. The museum tightens. The secret drawer had been opened. The thing inside was handled, but not explained. Voss felt it in his lungs. Vale felt it in her hands. Merrick couldn't sleep. Someone was filing it. and bureaucracy somehow was more terrifying than any ghost. Kaido's choice. She stood in the bathroom, finger pressed to the mirror, life sitting under her ribs, two futures knocking at the same door. One honest, one easy. Sean's shadow lingered. Germain's silence echoed. She whispered, "Whatever I choose, I live with." That was not weakness. That was power. Theological echoes. Gumbo, Dorothea, and Clotilde sat quietly and talked about old miracles. Jesus walking on water, not as spectacle, but as metaphor. What if it meant not sinking under the weight of other people's fear? What about the resurrection stories, where no one recognized him afterward? Dorothea said, "Maybe divinity looks ordinary after death. That scares people." Chaos listened and understood more than he said. The town fills with signs. Somewhere, Easter eggs were hidden, not for children, but for adults trying to find purpose. Hopscotch chalk lines appeared overnight. Beer cans collected in neat lines like offerings. A stray dog named Lassie kept stealing a rope from a construction site and dragging it everywhere like it mattered. A man practiced lasso tricks in a church parking lot for no reason. Stand-up comics tried material about fear and failed. Tent revivals spread through nearby parishes. Faith healing happened quietly. No fireworks, just relief. All of it swirled through the town like weather. The ending. That night, the mirror pulsed once. The goo hummed slightly. Chaos stared at his ceiling. Clotilde sat in her office with the lights off. Kaito held her stomach. Gumbo prayed without moving his lips. Dorothea read the Bible and stopped on a verse she had never noticed before. And the chapter ended on an older proverb, soft and dangerous. "He who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of the foolish suffers harm," and no one knew which one they were anymore. Chapter 24. The Falling, the Flowers, and the Fevered Road. The consequences didn't wait. They never did. Not in this town where mirrors whispered, and nuns glowed, and children bent reality with a thought. Everything hit like a hammer. And it began with the music. The transmission. Germain had Otis Redding playing through a cracked Bluetooth speaker, "I've Been Loving You Too Long," and the whole garage vibrated with that sort of ancient longing that made bolts loosen easier. Gumbo hummed along under the El Dorado, one leg sticking out, greasy denim flapping lightly from an old box fan. Dorothea sat on a stool beside them in a sienna-colored dress, writing in a notebook with absolute concentration. She was cataloging miracles like an accountant on the last day of tax season. The goo disappearing like snow in a warm rain. The mirror pulsing in the night. Chaos making time bend in a middle school hallway. Clotilde stopping a hostage crisis with 3 sentences. Kaito's impossible pregnancy. Scott's floating torso. Kidney stones that talked. Nuns giving birth to petals, and how the world seemed to wobble between real and unreal, like a loose tooth. Dorothea lived for lists. They made nonsense seem manageable. Gumbo slid deeper under the car frame, tapping it with a wrench. "This old thing," he muttered, "is held together by hope and lies." Germain snorted. "Like all the good ones." They laughed. And that was when the jack slipped. Just an inch. Just enough. Dorothea looked up, sensing the wrongness before she heard it. "Gumbo." The entire frame of the El Dorado lurched. Metal groaned like something alive. Germain lunged forward. Dorothea screamed, and the whole car came down. Parallel reality. A cut in the curtain. Somewhere else. Nowhere else. In a sideways street where no tires had ever touched pavement. A being stood and watched a ripple spread across dimensions. The being was tall, but not in a measurable way. It shimmered in colors that the eye recognized only because dreams had shown them first. Chartreuse around the edges, deep bruised sienna in its middle, and a shifting halo of something not yet named. Its face was smooth like wet clay. Its hands were too many and too few at the same time. It whispered Gumbo's name, not out of affection, but out of recognition. Then the ripple snapped shut, like curtains blown by wind suddenly falling still. The highway and the helicopter. Germaine and Dorothea screamed for 911 at the same time. Air traffic control authorized a medevac quickly, faster than expected, as if something unseen shoved paperwork aside. The helicopter came in low over Highway 90, blades whipping up gravel and dust. Gumbo wasn't awake enough to protest as they strapped him into the gurney, the paramedics shouting to hear themselves. Dorothea threw herself into the cabin beside him in her black shoulder shawl that flapped violently in the rotor wash. Someone shoved a small sequined cigarette pack into her hand. How it got there, she'd never know. It wasn't hers. She didn't smoke, but she kept it, watched from the ground, shaking, silent, covered in motor oil and grief. Germaine! The helicopter rose. Gumbo's world shrank to the beat of the rotor, the tightening straps, and Dorothea's hand on his shoulder. He whispered, "Where? Where are we going?" She answered, "Houston. Memorial Herman." The lights below blurred, then vanished. The nuns' flower to birth event. Back at the convent, all 17 nuns stopped at the same second. A quiet held. Then their bodies shuddered once, gently, and tiny flower petals fluttered out of them, not from any indecent place, but blooming straight from their clothing, like a magician pulling silk scarves from a sleeve. Soft, weightless, glittering faintly. Sienna petals, chartreuse petals, pure white petals shaped like teardrops. They drifted into the air like a gentle snow that smelled faintly of chocolate milk. The Mother Superior fainted. Sister June shouted, "It's happening again," and no one knew whether to pray or dance. Cars like omens. In the driveway behind the convent, parked in no logical order. A 1957 Ford Fairlane, a 1967 Stingray, an El Camino, a Ford Taurus, and a mini-bike that Chaos had rebuilt from junk parts. Every engine turned on at once. No one touched them. They revved in harmony, like a choir warming up, then shut off simultaneously. The nuns screamed. Chaos whispered, "That wasn't me." The goo's exit. The last traces of goo melted under the sun in strings like old candle wax. Some curled into shapes like runes. Some fizzled and evaporated bitterly. Some whispered, then it was gone. But nothing felt safer. Things rarely do when the supernatural departs suddenly. Sometimes absence is more dangerous than presence. Gumbo's fever dream. Houston glowed under the helicopter like a bowl of molten gold. Gumbo slipped into unconsciousness somewhere above the Trinity River. And then he dreamed. He dreamed of a desert that was also the ocean. He dreamed of a woman with a chartreuse halo and a sienna smile. He dreamed of a shape in the sky made of mirrors. He dreamed of Chaos floating above a field of wagon wheels. He dreamed of Scott, armless and legless, standing straight and tall. He dreamed of something being born. A flower? A world? A person? He couldn't tell, because the dream burned the edges of his vision, caught fire, and... Then a voice said, "Open your eyes. You're late. The cliffhanger, the petals, and the coma." Back at the convent, the nuns swept up piles of petals. They filled buckets. They filled baskets. They filled the hallways. But when the last petal touched the floor, the hospital monitors in Houston began to spike. Gumbo's coma deepened. His fever spiked. His hands clenched as if grabbing the wheel of an unseen vehicle. Dorothea leaned over him, crying, and somewhere between the convent and Houston, between dimensions and deserts and mirror worlds and petals. Something connected. The petals glowed faintly. Gumbo's dream world pulsed. The mysterious being in the other dimension turned its head sharply, as though it smelled something new. And the chapter froze on one impossible truth. Whatever was born from the nuns was tied to whatever Gumbo was becoming. The flower petals fluttered once in the empty hallway, and Gumbo's fever dream ignited into blinding white. The chapter ended mid-breath. Gumbo lay in a room that smelled like antiseptic and old magnolias, and the world on the other side of his eyelids had taken to wearing costumes. The ceiling in Houston became a desert at dawn, and the desert unfolded into a ballroom lit with orange like an ember held too close to the eye. Music threaded through it all. First something mournful, and then a beat that made the dream shift its hips. It was the sound of a disco record someone had never heard until that very night. And suddenly everyone in the dream understood what the fuss had been about. The bass as a promise, the hi-hats as laughter, the strings as small, precise miracles. He was not alone in the dream. Things crowded him with the polite cruelty of memory. The smell of barbed wire from the old fields his father spoke of once, a wagon wheel half buried in sienna dust, a flash of a 1,960 seconds mod poster that blurred into a 1,970 seconds fringe jacket. Faces he had loved, and faces he had not yet met. A woman in leopard print who had once called herself Good Time Charlie winked at him, and then vanished into the beat. A chorus of voices sang Wham Bam Thank You Ma'am, like it was a prayer of release and consent simultaneously. Meanwhile, in a different kind of orbit entirely, Clotilde and Sister Bernice packed for a trip that would make sense only to people who kept lists of things they feared and lists of things they needed to know. The mirror had given them coordinates, not precise lat, long but an insistence, Marrakesh, the castle. Midnight. They went incognito, wrapped in plain clothes that still carried dignity. Corduroy scarves, black shoulder shawls, sensible shoes. The trucker, who had become an awkward friend and confidant, stayed behind, grumbling about engines like Rosicrucian texts. They did not travel as tourists. They arrived at a castle that could have been a dream set for a film about states of mind, made visible. The courtyard was a maze of citrus trees and roses, petals already on the ground in colors of sienna and chartreuse, both oddly cheerful and slightly wrong. The stone of the castle felt like a fossilized memory, old enough to remember how people used to keep secrets, polished by hands that had never forgiven themselves. The three-person secret society awaited them in a room hung floor to ceiling, with tapestries that depicted hunts and harvests in the flat, bright way of people who believed in signs. They were not friendly. They did not pretend not to be slightly sinister. They never pretended. A long table lay between them, and on it were little plates of food so meticulously arranged they bordered on ritual. At the far end, a woman who insisted on being called only by a name that felt like a coin tapped a cigarette case that glittered with sequins. She had a laugh that could alter the tone of a room. A thin man with men's size 13 shoes folded under him observed the visitors like a taxonomist. A third, whose hands were always clean, spoke last and smiled as if he had been chewing on some particularly satisfying secret. 3 things happened in the castle before the hour turned and the city slipped into a deeper night. 1. The rose test. The society led them deep into the castle gardens. Each of the visitors, Clotilde, Sister Bernice, was given a rose. These were not ordinary roses. They were roses that sounded like small bells when you shook them, and their thorns had the politeness of old promises. They pricked, but they did not cut. Clotilde was told to choose a petal and to speak the truth. Of her heart into the hollow. She did, and the petal turned sienna, and for a breath the gardens agreed with her. Then the plant whispered back a memory which was not quite her own. It swirled into the air, and for a moment a picture formed of Germain working on an El Dorado transmission in a shed back home, of the jack slipping, of a body trapped beneath steel. It was kindness and accusation at the same time. 2. The horticulturist's riddle. An old man who kept the citrus trees and the walled herb beds, who smelled like mint and motor oil, asked them each a question about tending things that must be cut back. "If you remove the rot," he said, "do you kill the vine or save the whole?" It was both a lesson and a test. Horticulture, in that room, meant more than pruning. It meant seeing where the goo had lodged, in a world's roots, and understanding where removal would let something else collapse. Sister Bernice answered with the soft voice of someone who had once known how to set bones. "You cut what will spread." The man nodded, and somewhere he made a note on his palm. 3. The sound. Midnight came, and something like electricity hummed through the tapestries. A bad, loud memory of a nightclub mix, late 60s mod culture blending into 70 seconds posturing, fell like a curtain and revealed the first time people at one table had ever heard disco. It frightened them, and then it freed a laugh that turned the echoing hall into a precarious sanctuary. For a moment, the castle felt like a theater where every spectator had taken the stage. The thin man in size 13 shoes clapped slowly, as if approving of a play he had written in secret. Across the ocean of dreams, Gumbo's vital signs wavered. Nurses in Houston worked with morphine and then with a shock paddling to bring his heart back into a rhythm that respected both life and biology. The paramedics called his family. Dorothea beeped into voicemail. Lights in the ICU were a whirl of clinical white, then orange flare in his fever. Gramophone snatches of Roberta Flack's "Where is the love" threaded through his sleep, like a hymn turned sideways. Someone in the room played it softly on a phone. Someone in his dream answered back by pointing out a small wagon wheel lying half-buried along a shoreline. Back in Marrakesh, a disturbing undercurrent threaded the night. The society was collecting things. Small trinkets that looked unremarkable. A mini-bike's bent pedal, a scrap of a 1957 Fairlane's chrome, a scrap of mahogany driftwood, then cataloging them with the precise cruelty of collectors who think objects can speak for people. One of them, the man with the spotless hands, showed Sister Bernice a small glass vial containing a dust so fine it might have been powdered petal. "We are consolidating memory," he said. "We are finding ways for world bodies to hold what is not their own." His voice was velvet and oversight. The parallel between the castle and the world, without walls, made itself obvious in an unpleasant way. The goo had melted away in town like snow in a warm rain, but it had not disappeared so much as rearranged. The nuns' flower births had been fragments of something larger, a redistribution, a migration of memory into living things, into roses that chimed, into citrus that tasted like old lullabies. In Marrakesh, they explained that what had been birthed, petals, fragments, the little clear enunciations, were being invited to settle into places where they might not hurt the living. The society presented this as strategy. Clotilde and Bernice felt it as a choice between stewardship and theft. 3 more moments shook that castle night into its bones. A group of sex workers, local women, who had an uneasy arrangement with the castle's caretakers, performed an improvised lament under the citrus trees and made everyone in earshot remember that even the world's most practical barters have corners of tenderness. That lament included the oddest lyric, Janet. "Call me back. which made everyone snort in sudden, embarrassed delight. In a small courtyard they found barbed wire, artfully arranged around a sculpture. It was meant to look like a crown. The man with the clean hands explained, "Pain makes boundaries visible." Sister Bernice wanted to throw up in the fountain. Instead, she picked a sprig of mint and tucked it behind her ear. On a second-floor balcony, a young woman performed a short, haunting dance in a hot pink tuxedo jacket and nothing else but a pair of socked feet clinging to the coping. She moved like someone whose body remembered better than her head. She moved like a sermon done in 4 minutes flat. Someone called out a Reba Mack entire line as a joke, and for a second the castle's future and its past tangled like two dancers stepping on each other's toes. All the while the rest of the world twitched. The petals in the convent's halls glowed briefly as chartreuse that did not belong in natural light. The little kidney stone jay, who had been hitching along in Gumbo's pocket like a disgruntled spirit with a sense of timing, spoke once into the fever dream. It had become an odd aromatherapist of truth in recent times. The stone, small and stern, whispered to Gumbo, a voice like gravel and old radio static. "If you do not wake, they will fold what is left into neat packages." Then, with an almost apologetic inhale, the stone crumbled. Dust spun in tiny choreography and blew away like a promise splintering. The dust melt of Jay was the signal the world needed. The goo babies, the last thin strings of translucent making, finally dissolved. Where the clear globes had been affixed to leaves and windowsills, tiny seeds remained, microscopic and fertile. The petals stopped appearing from nuns. The world sighed as if a child had learned to let go. But not everything ended with tidy resignation. Morphine eased one knot and not the other. An electric shock brought Gumbo's heart back twice, and each time he trembled under the paddles as if the paddles had touched not just flesh, but memory. Nurses murmured about respiratory quivers, orange-fevered casts of light that hinted at something like revival and something dangerously like infection. The ICU monitors registered a rhythm that was not quite clean but might pass for life if you were tired of arguing with the gods. Dorothea catalogued the small miracle, the way the ECG leaned back into human shapes, the way Gumbo's fingers twitched as if steering a wheel in dream sleep, the way his breath smelled faintly of chocolate milk and diesel. At dawn, while Marrakesh slept under distant minarets, Sister Bernice and Clotilde boarded a small plane home, bearing less confident luggage and more secret weight. The society's thin man stood at the castle's gate and called after them, "We economize memory. You should be grateful." His words lay like a varnish over everything, glossy and false. Back in the town, the garden beds sprouted tiny seedlings where petals had once lain. The mini-bike in the convent courtyard coughed to life on its own, and then sputtered harmlessly into silence. The sky that had cracked earlier as if to check for room to breathe, the slight white fissure that had appeared one night and then healed, widened just enough to let a sliver of sun through. It did not heal all the way. It was a warning bruise, visible and not yet explained. Gumbo's eyes fluttered open twice and closed. Each time, a clumsy smile tried on his lips like a man trying new shoes. He opened them for the third time in the late afternoon, and the room was full of people who'd been holding their breath for a long time. His first sound was not speech. It was a small, honest laugh, the kind of startled laughter someone makes when a bad dream untangles. The castle's work, the society's collecting, had not been entirely benevolent. Paperwork in the secret room showed that they had been carving memory into objects, making curio cabinets where whole histories might be arranged and sold to the highest bidder. That would become a problem in later chapters. For now, the immediate thing was simpler and kinder. A man was awake who had been a fulcrum for every small sanctity the town had practiced. He breathed. The petals had stopped from the nuns. The goo had melted. And the world, for an hour at least, arranged itself into the small, fragile shape of hope. As evening fell like a thick saffron cloth over the town, a last soft sound shivered through the convent and across the city and up over the minarets of Marrakesh and into the tiled room where the secret society logged their finds. Somebody picked up an old record, and a vinyl creak preluded the needle falling. That creak sounded exactly like the world holding itself between two breaths. Then, on the record, a voice, not quite human, not quite remembered, sang a single line. The last of the chapter's words was not a promise. It was a shape. "We have awakened the question," the line seemed to say. And questions, once asked, require answers. Outside, a small seed in the garden trembled. Inside, in the castle's vault, a tape clicked and rewound. Somewhere, a hand folded a paper into thirds and slid it into a pocket. The sky closed its slight crack and watched. The world waited for the response. Chapter 26, where the seam begins to speak. The heartbeat of the hospital thumped like a distant drumline, steady, stubborn, refusing to give Gumbo up even as he drifted somewhere far past the chartreuse curtains and sienna-tinted world of the ICU. Machines hummed beside him, glimmering like tiny candelabras in the dimness. His breath rose and fell in shallow waves, the kind that made Dorothea feel as if she were trying to balance all of creation on the tip of a bowling pin. He looked too small for the bed, too pale, too gone, but not gone. Never gone. A nurse wheeled past carrying chocolate milk to another patient, and for one surreal moment Dorothea knew in her bones, that Gumbo could smell it from wherever he was drifting. She squeezed his hand, whispering every prayer she'd ever known and a few she'd invented on the spot. Prayers with telephone poles in them. Prayers with paprika. Prayers with the Virgin Mary, standing in a garden party, wearing a sun hat from a haberdasher across the veil. "Come back, baby," she whispered. "You don't get to leave before I yell at you about that transmission." Across the room, Sister Clotilde watched with sharp, grieving eyes. She knew that Gumbo wasn't simply unconscious. He was touching something, some membrane thin as a menstrual clot separating the world from its reflection. She felt it in her own pulse, the way the air crackled like a tiki torch in a stiff wind. Marrakesh had changed her. Marrakesh had etched warnings into her bones. And now those warnings were humming in the air vents of a Louisiana hospital like Star Trek phaser feedback. The seam was opening. They had run out of time. The realm. Gumbo was drifting through a corridor that wasn't a corridor, a highway that wasn't a highway, a ribbon of light and bone laid over a field of barbed wire and roses. Somewhere, a mini-bike sputtered through the air like a lazy beetle. A 1957 Ford Fairlane gleamed in the distance beside a rusting '67 Stingray and an El Camino that oozed nostalgia straight into his bloodstream. He could hear music. Otis Redding's voice, tender as old velvet. Then Donny Hathaway and Roberta Flack threading through the wind. Songs about love and longing. Songs that tried to anchor him. But anchoring was impossible here, because the sky cracked. Just a hairline fracture at first, a tiny orange fissure, then widening. Light spilling like blood, through from a wound. He felt something small and warm at his ankle, one of his talking kidney stones. Jay, the gender-neutral one who'd been hitchhiking in his pocket when the accident happened. They were glowing faintly. Terrified. "Gumbo," Jay whispered, voice trembling like a tambourine in a revival tent. Listen carefully. The seam is thinning. You are walking on memory made solid. You must not. Jay flickered, then disintegrated into dust at his feet. The dust blew upward like melted snow evaporating. The world around him shook. Roses burst into petals, thousands fluttering like tiny newborn nuns. Sienna and chartreuse streaked the air. Everything felt alive, trembling, expectant. Then he saw the figure. An unexplainable being standing on the cracked horizon, tall as a telephone pole, shaped like a man but shimmering like heat above asphalt. Its face flickered through memories. His, Dorothea's, Chaos's, Clotild's, the nuns, the towns. It wasn't a person. It was a crossing point. The being spoke, but the words weren't words. They were worlds. And then everything went black. The haberdasher arrives. Back in the waking world, Dorothea felt something shift. A breeze passed through the closed room. A chill. A perfume of roses and paprika. She looked up. A man in a pinstripe suit stood in the doorway, holding a box of hats. A haberdasher. In a hospital. Voice smooth as mahogany driftwood sliding along a rolling. Evening, he said gently. Tide. I'm here for him. Dorothea squared her shoulders. Her grief made her dangerous. You're here to leave, she snapped. Right now. The haberdasher smiled, soft and sad. Not to take him. To warn him. Clotilde stepped forward. Eyes narrowing. She felt Marrakesh vibrating behind her sternum again. You're not from this side. No, he answered. And neither is the danger. He placed a bowler hat on the counter. Its shadow flickered. Two shadows, one on this world's wall, another lagging slightly behind, like a second hand moving wrong. The museum, he said. It's boiling. Time is curdling there. You need to get ready. Dorothea's knees buckled. Clotilde grabbed her arm. But Gumbo, Dorothea whispered. The haberdasher touched her wrist. He's close to the seam. But he's not crossing. Not yet. When he wakes, he'll remember something important. Something that ties your whole story together. Clotilde's voice cracked. And if he doesn't wake? He looked at them with terrible compassion. The worlds will decide that for him. The museum starts to break. Across town, the museum lights flickered like a row of candelabras in a storm. Telephone poles near the building hummed until the wood shook, like a vibrating tuning fork. Hot Wheels cars began rolling off shelves in the gift shop by themselves. A stagecoach display suddenly flickered, not out, but in, like it was appearing from somewhere it didn't belong. From the security office, a guard heard whispers coming from the old anthropology wing. Whispers in languages nobody had ever spoken, and from somewhere deeper. A soft, wet pop, as if something was being born again. Astrology as a warning. Later that night, Bernice sat alone in the hospital chapel, staring at a Virgin Mary statue that wouldn't stop shimmering around the edges. She opened her astrology charting journal, the one she only used when the world felt tilted. But the constellations wouldn't sit still. They kept rearranging themselves into the same symbol. A circle within a circle. A seam. She understood the message. The stars weren't predicting anything. They were reacting. Reality was shifting, bending, begging for closure. The cosmic membrane was thinning every hour Gumbo stayed suspended between worlds, and the museum, the original wound, was beginning to pulse. The final turn of the chapter. Dorothea returned to Gumbo's bedside just before dawn. She held his hand. She stroked his knuckles. She whispered stories, dirt roads, fishing trips, lazy days, playing cards, all the simple memories the rupture loved to steal. Then Gumbo's finger twitched, just once, barely there, but enough to send a lightning bolt through her chest. She leaned closer. His lips parted. One word came out, a word nobody had spoken in years, a word that tied every strange thing together, from the goo to the petals to the museum to the mirror beings to Scott floating ghost-like above them all. Dorothea froze. Her breath stopped. The haberdasher reappeared at the doorway, face turned pale. Clodagh whispered, "It can't be. Not that. Not again." Gumbo repeated the word. And the lights in the hospital flickered once, twice. Then the chapter ends. Right there, on the edge of the seam, on the edge of truth, waiting to spill. Chapter 27. The tipping point at the neon garden party. The night had a strange hum to it, the kind you feel in your ribs before you hear it in your ears. The group gathered at the neon-lit garden behind the haberdasher's shop, which, through a chain of events too convoluted for even them to trace, had become their unofficial headquarters for planning anything of importance. The garden party was chaos, tiki torches flickering like nervous candles, a candelabra set up on a picnic table for no clear reason, half-empty bowls of ranch dressing sweating under the moonlight. Gumbo was lying on a chaise lounge, pale as a ghost with a sprained arm in one sling and a heating pad across the hip surgery scar that still ached when the humidity rose. His breathing was shallow, not dying, but definitely letting the universe graze its long, cold knuckles across his cheek. His eyes fluttered open every few seconds, muttering things that sounded like prophetic crossword clues. The only reason he was even conscious was because one of his sentient kidney stones, the mouthy one with the gravelly voice, had lodged itself in his hand like a tiny oracle. "Y'all better listen up. Stars say trouble's coming. Astrology ain't fake when it's spoken by a mineral with first-hand experience." Germain winced but nodded. He'd finally admitted, quietly, fragilely, to the group about his hidden crack addiction. He looked smaller now, stripped of bravado, hands fidgeting like they didn't know what to do in the absence of lies. But for the first time in the whole story, he looked free. Colin leaned against a telephone pole, sipping something with too much paprika floating in it, the drink of a man who'd survived bariatric surgery, emotional upheaval, and 3 different attempted kidnappings. He stared at Gumbo, then at the kidney stone, then at the sky, as if maybe James Bond would parachute in with answers. "Let's just ask the obvious," Colin said. "Is Gumbo going to, leave us?" The stone coughed. "I said he's close, not gone. He's hovering near the cosmic vestibule. Like standing in the glass coffin showroom, but not picking a model. That felt too real, too close." A stagecoach approached in the distance, wheels thunderous, kicking up dust that sparkled like glitter. Wild speculation, but someone whispered that this might tie back to the mysterious funeral 2 chapters ago, the one with the glass coffin and the guest book that held names none of them recognized. The stagecoach rolled to a stop. The driver was the trucker's cousin, same eyes, same air of a man who knew too much about things he couldn't say out loud. "I've been sent with a message," he said, climbing down, "about the funeral, about the Virgin Mary, about the object you found." The object was wrapped in a strip of cloth, now crumpled inside Germain's pocket. Earlier they joked it looked like a dried menstrual clot with a shimmer around the edges, but now, under the garden torches, it pulsed like something alive. Something old. Something that very much wanted to be acknowledged. Germain swallowed and pulled it out. The clot glowed. Everyone stepped back. "Good," the stagecoach driver said. "You're ready." Colin muttered. Ready for what? A Star Trek crossover episode? The driver didn't smile. Ready for the part where everything you've been through stops being random. Behind them, Hot Wheels cars scattered across the table rolled in unison toward Gumbo, forming a strange pattern around his chair, like a raceway meant to contain his spirit in case it slipped loose. Gumbo weakly lifted his hand. Hear it, he rasped. All of it. The beginning of the answers. The kidney stone nodded, as if this was its moment. Sit down, folks. Prophecy's about to stitch itself together. The torchlight flickered, and something trembled in the air, like a story realizing it was time to circle home. Chapter 28. The Unraveling at the Garden Gate. The air around the haberdasher's backyard shimmered like heat off asphalt, even though the night was cool enough to make your nose tingle. They all felt it. The shift. Something was about to reveal itself, and it wasn't going to be gentle. Gumbo took a ragged breath, the kind that sounds half human and half someone whispering through a cracked door. His eyes fluttered like he was trying to see a world layered on top of this one. The glowing clot in Germain's hand pulsed again, a soft heartbeat of light. The Hot Wheels cars around Gumbo's chair vibrated as though revving tiny engines. And then the kidney stone cleared its non-existent throat. You've all been wondering about the funeral, it began, in that gravel voice that always made people glance around for a malfunctioning garbage disposal. The glass coffin. The names in the guest book you didn't know. The Virgin Mary statue with the hairline crack. The trucker who vanished and reappeared in chapter. What? 16. Let's untangle it. Colin leaned forward, posture stiff but hopeful. Finally, the stagecoach driver stepped closer, boots crunching the paprika someone had spilled earlier during an argument about astrology. The funeral wasn't for a person, he said. It was for an event. The group froze as the idea settled. Germain frowned. Events don't get funerals. The kidney stone shook in Gumbo's hand like it was offended. That one did. Y'all witnessed the burial of the missing year. Silence took over the garden. Even the tiki torches seemed to pause their flicker. Colin blinked. The what? The missing year, the stagecoach driver repeated. A year that vanished from this town's history. Scrubbed out, forgotten, dead. Germain's voice cracked. Then why was our names in that guest book? The driver nodded. Because you lived through that year, and you forgot it. Everyone did. The glass coffin held the last remnant of it, an artifact, and someone, something, was trying to keep it buried permanently. Gumbo stirred, whispering, but the clot. It remembers. Every gaze shifted to the glowing clot again. It pulsed harder now, tugging their focus like a magnet. The driver's expression hardened. That is no clot, he said. It's a memory node. And that statue wasn't a statue, the driver said. It was a vessel. The Virgin Mary appearance wasn't theological. It was a disguise to keep the node hidden from the entity that erased the year. Colin rubbed his temples. This is feeling like Star Trek. After you've mixed pain meds with espresso. Good, the kidney stone said. Because that's the level you need to be operating on. One of the Hot Wheels cars zoomed forward on its own, smashing gently into Gumbo's foot. He gasped. His eyes opened wider, clearer, like the edge of death had receded an inch. It's coming back to me, he murmured. The year. The thing we saw. The thing that wanted the town blank. Germain looked terrified. Is that what caused my addiction? The gaps? The stone answered softly. Not caused. Exploited. Everyone shuddered. Across the garden, the giant candelabra burst into flame all at once, every candle roaring to life. The stagecoach horses whinnied and pulled at their reins. The telephone pole overhead hummed like an amp warming up. The clock glowed bright as a lantern. Then it projected an image into the air. A figure, like heat off asphalt, even though the night was cool enough to make your nose tingle. They all felt it, the shift. Something was about to reveal itself, and it wasn't going to be gentle. Gumbo took a ragged breath, the kind that sounds half human and half someone whispering through a cracked door. His eyes fluttered like he was trying to see a world layered on top of this one. The glowing clot in Germain's hand pulsed again, a soft heartbeat of light. The Hot Wheels cars around Gumbo's chair vibrated as though revving tiny engines. And then the kidney stone cleared its non-existent throat. You've all been wondering about the funeral, it began, in that gravel voice that always made people glance around for a malfunctioning garbage disposal. The glass coffin. The names in the guest book you didn't know. The Virgin Mary statue with the hairline crack. The trucker who vanished and reappeared in chapter. What? 16. Let's untangle it. Colin leaned forward, posture stiff but hopeful. Finally, the stagecoach driver stepped closer, boots crunching the paprika someone had spilled earlier during an argument about astrology. The funeral wasn't for a person, he said. It was for an event. The group froze as the idea settled. Germain frowned. Events don't get funerals. The kidney stone shook in Gumbo's hand like it was offended. That one did. Y'all witnessed the burial of the missing year. Silence took over the garden. Even the tiki torches seemed to pause their flicker. Colin blinked. The what? The missing year, the stagecoach driver repeated. A year that vanished from this town's history. Scrubbed out. Forgotten. Dead. Germain's voice cracked. Then why was our names in that guest book? The driver nodded. Because you lived through that year, and you forgot it. Everyone did. The glass coffin held the last remnant of it. An artifact. And something, was trying to keep it buried permanently. Gumbo stirred, whispering, but the clot. It remembers. Every gaze shifted to the glowing clot again. It pulsed harder now, tugging their focus like a magnet. The driver's expression hardened. That is no clot, he said. It's a memory node. And that statue wasn't a statue, the driver said. It was a vessel. The Virgin Mary appearance wasn't theological. It was a disguise to keep the node hidden from the entity that erased the year. Colin rubbed his temples. This is feeling like Star Trek. After you've mixed pain meds with espresso. Good, the kidney stone said. Because that's the level you need to be operating on. One of the Hot Wheels cars zoomed forward on its own, smashing gently into Gumbo's foot. He gasped. His eyes opened wider, clearer, like the edge of death had receded an inch. It's coming back to me, he murmured. The year. The thing we saw. The thing that wanted the town blank. Germain looked terrified. Is that what caused my addiction? The gaps? The stone answered softly. Not caused. Exploited. Everyone shuddered. Across the garden, the giant candelabra burst into flame all at once, every candle roaring to life. The stagecoach horses whinnied and pulled at their reins. The telephone pole overhead hummed like an amp warming up. The clot glowed bright as a lantern. Then it projected an image into the air. A figure, vague, tall, blurred like someone photographed mid-shift. A person made of static and shadow, holding a stagecoach whip in one hand and something stranger in the other. Colin squinted. "Is that a bowling pin?" "Yes," the stone said, "because that's what started the erasure." The projected figure moved like a villain in a forgotten dream, into clarity, and then, like a long-lost memory finally elbowing its way back home, the vision snapped. They all gasped. They recognized that face. They'd seen it before, scattered in different chapters, always where weirdness peaked. At the soccer match, leaving the slumber party, standing near the vintage, 67 Stingray parked behind the abandoned garden center. The shadow person had been watching them the whole time. "Who is that?" Colin whispered. The kidney stone's voice dropped. "That is the reason Gumbo is dying." The group stiffened. "That," it said, "is the one who erased your missing year. And it wants you all gone before the memory node restores what you saw." The clot pulsed again. The garden lights flickered. And Gumbo closed his eyes, letting out one fragile breath that sounded too close to final. The chapter ends with a hush. A sharp turning point. A horizon waiting to split open. Chapter 29. The memory node opens its eye. The night took on that strange hollowness, the kind you hear behind your ribs, not with your ears. Something old was getting ready to wake up. Something that remembered them, even if they didn't remember it. Gumbo's breath rasped like someone trying to light a match underwater. Germaine held the glowing clot, the memory node, with both hands now. The light had grown heavier, thicker, like it was a liquid that wanted to pour upward. Each pulse synced with Gumbo's heartbeat, tugging him toward the world of the living, then slipping its grip again. The stagecoach driver crossed his arms. "When that node fully activates, the erased year comes back. You'll know everything you lost. But the one who did the erasing, they'll know that you know." "Lovely," Colin muttered. Nothing like waking up memories just to get hunted again. The kidney stone in Gumbo's palm grumbled. "Better hunted with truth than safe in a lie. Now shut up and watch." Germaine frowned at the stone. "Why are you even here?" "I'm symbolic, you ninny," it barked. "I'm your painful wisdom. I'm the hard thing you pass when you've ignored too much for too long." Dorothea let out a single, anxious laugh. "That tracks." She knelt beside Gumbo, brushing his hair back. His skin had that waxy sheen, like he was already halfway into the fever dream world, where nuns delivered flowers instead of sermons. She whispered, "You come back now, sweetheart. Don't make me drag you out of heaven by your toes." The Hot Wheels cars at his feet arranged themselves into a circle. Then, suddenly, a perfect Starfleet insignia. Germaine screeched. "Why Star Trek?" The kidney stone sighed. "Because someone in the missing year saw the truth. And to them, it looked like a science fiction episode gone wrong." The stagecoach driver cleared his throat. "The figure you saw, the shadow person, they weren't always that. They used to be something else." "Someone else," Colin corrected. The air split with a metallic crack, like a giant telephone pole snapping in half. The projection from the memory node swelled and sharpened. The shadow person came into perfect clarity. and everyone stopped breathing. "Wait," Germain whispered. "Don't say it," Dorothea hissed. "Don't you dare." But Colin couldn't stop himself. "That's Scott, not the hovering spiritual presence, not the limbless prophet they worshipped long ago. This face was Scott before all that, before the accident, before the decline, before the worship. He looked whole, younger, terrified. What the hell does this mean?" Colin asked. The kidney stone clicked its rocky tongue. "Means your saint wasn't always a saint." And something about that missing year broke him so bad, he fractured across realities. The projection shifted. Scott's face contorted into fear, then rage, then something worse, emptiness. Germain shook his head, but he couldn't erase a whole year. That's impossible. The stagecoach driver tapped the node. Not him alone. The memory node emitted a low hum. The horses pawed the ground. Even the tiki torches leaned inward, like gossiping cousins. Then the vision expanded, and behind Scott, another figure appeared. Tall, human-shaped but wrong, a grin cut too wide, eyes like dried ink, wearing a coat made of shadows stitched to other shadows. And in its hand, a bowling pin. Colin gagged. "You're telling me the villain of this entire story carries a bowling pin like some suburban grim reaper?" The kidney stone whispered. "That isn't a bowling pin. It's a memory eraser in disguise. Humans see what they can comprehend." Germain's skin prickled. "So this thing used Scott to erase the year?" "Used him," the stone echoed. "Possessed him, broke him, hollowed him." Dorothea's breath rattled. "So the Scott who hovers around us now is just a spiritual leftover?" "No," the driver said gently. "He's the part that survived." Gumbo suddenly jolted upright with a full-body shudder, like someone yanked him up from underwater by the soul. His eyes snapped open wide, glowing faintly chartreuse. He whispered, "I remember." The garden went still. Colin swallowed. "Remember what?" Gumbo pointed shaking fingers at the projection. "That thing, the shadow man. I saw it. I saw it erase the year. And we tried to stop it. Germain, you tried the hardest." Germain staggered backward. "What? Me?" "You saw it take Scott," Gumbo whispered. "You grabbed the memory node from the Virgin Mary statue. You hid it in the funeral home. You made us swear to forget until we had a way to fight it." Germain's face drained. Dorothea whispered, "But why didn't we remember telling ourselves that?" Gumbo coughed, weak but certain, "Because Scott erased the rest of it. The monster made him do it." Before they could react, the projection flickered. Something slammed the memory node from inside, distorting the image. The stagecoach horses panicked. The candelabra's flames shot 5 feet high. The telephone pole crackled like a live wire. The shadow entity in the projection slowly turned its head toward them. It saw them. It knew. And it smiled. The memory node burst into blinding white light. Germain screamed and dropped it. Gumbo collapsed again, gasping. The projection dissolved into a screech of color, and the shadow creature's voice, cold as a cracked window in winter, slithered across the garden. "Found. You." The light died. Everything went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Chapter 30. The Howling Between Seconds. The garden felt abandoned by sound. Even the frogs paused mid-croak, as if the universe had hit mute on everything that wasn't terrified. Gumbo lay limp again, barely breathing. His chartreuse glow had faded into a weak flicker, like a nightlight running out of batteries. Germain stumbled toward him. "Gumbo, baby, stay with me." The little kidney stone hopped onto Gumbo's chest, like a physician with dubious credentials. "He's alive," it croaked. "Barely. His soul's doing paperwork between worlds right now, but he's alive." Dorothea, pale as chalk, whispered, Did that thing see us?" The stagecoach driver nodded grimly. "It remembered you." "That's worse." Colin wiped sweat from his forehead. "Perfect. Just perfect. The cosmic boogeyman has our GPS coordinates now." A sudden crackling sizzled through the air, snapping every nerve upright. Electricity raced down the telephone poles in a violet shimmer, like the sky was combing its own hair with lightning. Dorothea pointed upward. What is it doing?" The air pulsed. Once, twice, thrice. Then the clouds split open like a gash. Slowly. Silently. From that opening, something began to unfold. Not a shape, not a body. More like a piece of night unrolled into the world. Germain whispered, "It's trying to cross over." The shadow entity's voice poured through the crack in the sky. A voice like someone speaking from the wrong side of the wind. "You remember. I remember. The year returns. So I return." Colin's jaw clenched. "We need a plan, a big one, a stupid one. A desperate one." Dorothea grabbed the memory node. It was cracked now, but still glowing faintly like paprika dust lit from within. "Can this thing stop it?" The stagecoach driver shook his head. "No, but it can slow it down. Or lure it." "Lure it," Germain squeaked. "You want us to catfish a cosmic demon." "Not catfish," the driver said calmly. "Bait." The ground suddenly vibrated. Everyone turned. A herd of wildcats came sprinting down the road. Dozens. Snarling, but running from something, not toward it. Behind them, the air shimmered into a wavering silhouette. Dorothea whispered, "It's stepping through." Germain grabbed Gumbo's hand. "I'm not letting him die. Not like this. Not after we survived everything else." The kidney stone chimed, then listened carefully. Because here comes the part nobody wants to hear. The stone wiggled its little rocky body, preparing for its big speech. The shadow entity fed on that erased year. It fed on fear, on chaos, on the unraveling of Scott's mind. And the more you remember, the more you taste good to it. Colin blanched. "Great. We're cosmic charcuterie." The stone jabbed a stubby edge at Germain. "And you were the one who heard it last time. You stole the memory node. You denied it a clean feast. So it wants you first." Germain blinked. "Me? Why me?" Colin slapped his arm. "Because you're spicy, apparently." But Dorothea's eyes narrowed. Something inside her had locked into place. A garden party hostess, discovering a tiger under the punch table, but refusing to panic before dessert was served. "We need to move," she said. "Now." She threw the memory node to Colin. He juggled it like a sweaty amateur in a Vegas sideshow. "What do I do with it?" "Hold it!" Dorothea barked. "Does it explode?" "Probably," Don't drop it. The node pulsed. The cracks glowed. Something inside it writhed, like a trapped firefly, with anger issues. The shadow entity spoke again. Closer now. Return what was taken. Germain yelled up at the sky. No! You can't have him. You can't have any of us. The clouds rippled. The entity pressed a single hand, shadowy, long-fingered, wrong, through the crack. The fingers touched the air like they were tasting it. Germain screamed. Gumbo's body convulsed. And then a sound rose from the ground. A chant, a hum, a vibration. Dorothea gasped. What is that? The glow around Gumbo's chest changed color, from chartreuse to sienna to a deep, molten orange. The kidney stone whispered, He's fighting. He's not gone yet. The Hot Wheels cars rattled. The stagecoach horses bowed their heads. Even the candlestick flames bent toward Gumbo like worshippers. Colin stuttered. He's resisting it? No, the stone said. He's calling something. A massive blast of wind slammed through the garden. A starburst of light ripped out of Gumbo's chest, shooting straight into the memory node in Colin's hands. The crack sealed. The node glowed impossibly bright, and then it spoke, not in words but in a tone. A note, a pitch, a single musical sound, the same sound the goo once sang. The same sound Scott's apparition hummed. The same sound from the erased year that nobody remembered remembering. Germain whispered, trembling. That's the key. Dorothea covered her mouth. He's unlocking the year. The memory node burst open like a blooming flower made of sunlight. Images flew out. Fast, chaotic, overlapping. Scott whole and terrified. Scott possessed. Germain stealing the node. Dorothea shielding Gumbo. Colin trying to destroy the eraser bowling pin. Sister Supreme chanting over a glowing pool. A Star Trek insignia flashing on a broken mirror. A stagecoach racing through time itself. A haberdasher handing them a warning note. The Virgin Mary statue bleeding light. A menstrual clot that moved on its own and pointed at the sky. Telephone poles bending into strange shapes. Astrology charts rearranging themselves. A tiki torch going out in a world with no wind. And then, the missing moment. The true moment. The one thing none of them had been able to recall. Germain in a circle of light, holding the memory node high, screaming, banish the shadow and take the year with it. Then, darkness. The entity shrieked from the sky. You took my year. Germain screamed back, voice breaking but fierce. And we'll take it again. The wind howled. The sky ripped wider. The shadow entity began to emerge fully now, body forming like smoke, learning how to be muscle. Dorothea grabbed Germain's shoulders. Run! The stagecoach driver pointed toward the old dirt road. To safety, to the pole marker. Colin dropped the memory node into his shirt and took off like a man fleeing a swarm of bees with degrees in homicide. Dorothea dragged Germain. Germain dragged Gumbo. The shadow entity roared. The ground split open.